so. I hope this is the most.
Yeah, it is. We haven't really changed it.
Okay.
I don't know if it's the last one or not.
I have a feeling it may not be.
I don't think it is. It still says draft on it.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right, yeah, the draft. Yeah, I don't have the computer, that's right. You said the draft.
What is it? Show me. No, no. Well, pretty much. Not being redone. That's a memo that went with the ordinance to Barron's County. And then they have the DRB ordinance connected to it, so it's all common, yeah. Yeah,
This is just junk. This is just,
an RFP right after that, so.
I don't have a final copy. I have some early draft copies. Well, no, as long as you got it handy. Section, what sections are in this?
No, I know, I realize, I think there was something in the email this week saying, I put it to the memo and what I did was a summary of what's happening. I put the results in the DRB hearing. Yeah, I'm, yeah. Hang on, well, I mean, that was a summary, I mean, we don't have verbatim.
Did Bob come?
So that's,
Mars? Yeah, I believe you. He's right behind us. Somewhere. Yeah. I expected Travis to be here.
It's coming later.
but in the end, we got it covered, so I apologize. It wasn't exact. In retrospect, I probably should have had you guys review it before I sent it down. But it was a very tight line, because I was supposed to have it all turned around, so.
So the designation of historical property
Boy, we're really impressed.
is made by the city council.
Recommendation comes from the commission. But the designation comes from the commission.
They can offer, they can reject it. See, the key word on all of this is just recognition.
I'll ask her.
I'm getting tired.
Also, our wonderful IT person is here, so you can ask her about your issues with Granicus, so.
Oh, I sorted that out, actually. I tried my daughter's computer and it works much better.
Really?
I need to call her.
About speed?
Lynn
Oh.
Johnston.
Yeah, he's great.
He had really good luck with him helping
She
her.
spoke to me the other night when she was here and said the same.
Yeah.
That he was there quickly and helpful, and
Yeah,
I don't think he's very expensive either.
I want to say it's the same thing that was, do you know if it is the same?
Yeah, it's just been posted like that, yeah.
Shouldn't, you know,
We go through that in our house
it's the
too.
newer, faster.
Ours is the oldest.
Yeah, well, no, but Allison's,
Yeah.
you know, everybody had less memory on hers, and hers worked and mine didn't. I'm like, wait a minute, why is yours working and mine's
I
not?
use it both at home and at my computer here, which,
Harry's got a Czechoslovakian computer, though. It's that Windows knockoff. If she pony up and buy the real thing, she wouldn't have any problem.
Curtis, there is no Czechoslovakia.
Well, that's exactly why.
I don't know, Patty, was that your
That
point?
country.
Is that your point?
That might be the point, yeah.
Couldn't offend anyone with that.
Hey, my relatives were from there, but no. They were, but-
All right, shall we begin? Are you okay?
Yeah.
All right, if you'd all please rise for the invocation and stay standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Lord, thank you for the blessings of this day and the blessings in our lives. Thank you for the opportunity to bring the community together so we may work toward a shared vision for the city of Milton. Guide us in our decisions so we may leave here in harmony, having done good work that at the end of the day is in the honor and glory of your name. Amen.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order. I have 7:07 on my watch on today's Tuesday, September 22nd, 2009. Because it appears we have some members in the audience or of the community this evening who intend to speak, let me.
I think a lot of them, is everybody from historic preservation? Yes. Okay.
Okay. Actually, we don't have any zoning ordinance this evening, so we don't really need to read the parameters of the.
Well, technically, this is an amendment to the zoning ordinance, so.
Okay.
Although it
All right.
doesn't have the same rules as a
Well,
rezoning, but,
to make sure we're official, then I'll read it.
yeah.
Okay.
It wasn't like last time when we just talked about it.
Right. Okay. This is a regular meeting of the City of Milton Planning Commission. I'm Paul Moore, Chairman. This is a 7-member commission appointed to the City of Milton Mayor and City, appointed by the Mayor and City Council, created for the purpose of holding public hearings and making recommendations on rezoning, use permits, concurrent variance applications, the comprehensive land use plan and plan map, and other related plans and amendments to the zoning ordinance. This evening, we are full board, represented this evening by Commissioner Fred Edwards, George Ragsdale, Jennifer Fletcher, myself, Paul Moore, Carrie Schlenke, Curtis Mills, and Joe Kramer. Let's see. Petitions will be heard in sequence listed in the posted agenda. I would like to acquaint you with some of the rules and procedures conducting this meeting. Any applicant and all those speaking in support of an application will be allowed a total of 10 minutes to present the petition. The applicant may choose to save some time for rebuttal following the presentation by the opposition. The opposition will be allowed a total of 10 minutes to present its position, and if time remains, the opposition will be allowed to rebut. Since the burden of proof is upon the applicant will be allowed to make closing remarks provided time remains within the allotted 10 minutes. The staff of the Community Development Department will keep track of the time and will inform you periodically of the remaining time for your presentation. Each speaker must fill out a presentation card before speaking and leave it with a staff member of the Community Development Department. All speakers will identify themselves by name, address, and organization, if applicable, before beginning their presentation. Robin, I think that's probably sufficient for the
Okay,
thing that
that's
we
fine.
have here this evening. Okay. First item on our agenda is the approval of the action minutes, which I don't have a copy of. Do you?
I have one right there. I'm sorry, didn't I email
Good.
everybody?
I don't know if the official one that you're welcome to look at
But
that.
here's.
Okay, I have a motion regarding the minutes of the meeting of the August 25th, 2009.
I move we approve the action minutes of August 25th, 2009.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion?
I wasn't here, but it was my understanding that the minutes that reflected that some members voted was inaccurate. Or
That
were
was
in
the
favor.
previous one.
Sorry?
That was the previous one. Remember how
No.
it
Is it right? Is it?
was, remember how I had to have,
Yeah, I made, the last one, I made a change
right.
on the last minutes, but not,
This says some of the planning commissioners were concerned with prior use recognition.
But that,
That is just a summary, that's not action. that's not the official.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the minutes that we put in don't
Yes,
include
this
that.
is literally the action of the
All right.
motions.
I'll shut up.
But I agree. I do take issue with the fact that the summary minutes did say that. Because those aren't a part of the action minutes, I'm okay with approving this, but I just, for the record, I don't believe that that particular statement as reflected in the summary minutes was accurate. I thought that the commission was in it was in full agreement that we took issue with some of the things that were in there. And it wasn't some of us, it was some of the items. And with a 5-0 unanimous vote that night to defer, I thought that was a demonstration of that position.
Okay. I'll just make sure if I have to do it again, I'll make sure I distribute it to y'all, make sure it's in accordance with what you said.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I abstain.
I abstain.
Okay. Motion carries 502 with the 2 abstentions. Okay, thanks, everybody. Okay, the first item on our agenda tonight is RZ0904. Robin, is there anything to read into the record to open that discussion, or did we just pick up where we left off last time?
I'll just make a comment where last night we had the mayor and city council meeting, and it was voted unanimously to defer the item to you all for tonight's discussion and recommendations. A part of the motion was they're going to meet again, revisit it. It'll be advertised for, well, first of all, it'll go to the work session for the city council on October 12th, and we'll plan to advertise for October 19th, knowing that there's a good possibility it could be deferred into the November meeting. So just wanted to let you know that that's what the city council made their motion last night for. So anyway, you all have received some of the items to help in making some more informed decisions, as well as maybe bringing up some questions. And I know we have members of the Historic Preservation Committee here. So anyway, with that, I'll just go ahead and let you guys go on and ask your questions and hopefully have some input from the committee as well.
Okay. Actually, with the permission of the council or the planning commission, what I might like to do is ask the members in attendance this evening of the Historic Preservation Board if they'd like to make any comments to us before we begin our discussion. If it's everyone's pleasure. Anybody opposed to that? Gentlemen, would you care to make any opening comments for our consideration?
Thank you very much. My name is Mark Hancock, and I live at 1805 Providence Farms Lane here in the great city of Milton, Georgia. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. I just want to make a few comments. I won't take more than a few minutes. First, I want to talk about the committee.
Is the mic on?
I'm not sure your mic's on.
Oh,
Now it is.
the committee itself had a very passionate group of people, in this group behind me and many others. We're very passionate about historical preservation in the city of Milton, and they can name every building older than 20 years in this city. It's amazing to me. The authority that the committee had, there's been some back and forth discussion. I just want to clarify, the authority was clear from day one. The authority was only to write an ordinance, not to designate properties, not to recommend properties, only to write an ordinance. And I know there's been some questions. Would you designate this? Would you designate that? This committee doesn't have that authority. We are only here to write an ordinance and create a framework for historical preservation for our city. When we first met with staff, it was clear to us, and I just want to make this clear to you as a commission, that our responsibility was to write this ordinance and report to city council with the ordinance. It was never our intention to bypass planning commission or design review board or any other group of people. We pretty much did what we were told very quickly. We met for hours till 9 o'clock at night a few nights and went to city council for the work session. And then we came forth to, we were asked to come to you guys. But it was never our intention to bypass planning commission. We did what we were told. And I just want to make sure that you were aware of that in case there's a clarification issue. I put my glasses on. The ordinance is really just a framework. 95% or 90% of it is really the organization of the Historic Preservation Commission. There's a lot of detail in there on how the commission is formed. It's probably no different than most of the commissions and boards in the city. Each city council person nominates one person who's accrued by the city council. And then there are two at-large seats for those who have historical passion who are allowed to join. What I want to make clear as far as what the commission's authority is, the future authority of the commission. The commission is charged with record keeping, basic record keeping. There's a lot of pages on that. But basically the commission is responsible for either one, recommending future structures or districts for historical preservation, and two, receiving applications for modifications to those structures if there's a modification request. The actual authority to designate a property or a district as a historical structure or historical district lies with the elected officials and city council, and not with the commission that's formed by this ordinance. I think there was some of the emails I saw, I think there was some discrepancy or some lack of clarity in that regard. I just want to make sure it's clear that city council in an open forum, open meeting with full disclosure. I think of one of the meetings, it was this or design review board, where there was a question of whether there would be full disclosure and whether it would be a public hearing. Obviously, city council is a public hearing. The ordinance talks in detail regarding the disclosure necessary to the homeowner and to the general public. City council meetings are obviously open to the public. So it is an open meeting. All decisions are public. All decisions are made by public officials and not by the commission that this ordinance creates. Regarding the recommendation, another thing regarding the authority of the commission, how do you recommend a particular, let's say a structure, say structure to be an historic structure, a barn. I have a passion for barns. How do you, the commission can recommend a barn to be an historical structure. The city council can recommend that barn to be a historical structure. And then there's a lot of language in there that community groups can recommend a structure for historical preservation. So the commission doesn't have any monopoly on recommendation. It's really a public process in that regard. And really the commission's really only, I guess, power is to take those recommendations, vote on them, and send it to the city council where they actually designate and have the final approval. The comment that we talked about most of the time, and I just want you to know we spent 90% of our time talking about the prior use language. Obviously, it's what we're going to talk about tonight. I just want to give you a history of how we got there, because it came up, and I want you guys to know how it came up. We didn't know how many properties would be affected. It was brought up, what if we have an old courthouse or any commercial use, and we seem to have country stores on our mind right now. There was other types of properties. Blacksmith shop was one thing that came up. What if we have a blacksmith shop that was in use in Civil War and it's still there, no one's used it, and how do we preserve these properties? As a resident of Savannah, I grew up on East 48th Street in Savannah in the 60s and 70s. In my neighborhood is now a historic district. It wasn't at the time, but I saw those battles that took place not just in the residential side of the historic Savannah, Georgia, but on the commercial side. And if you've ever been to the Hyatt on River Street, you know where you lost. And if you ever seen the new, what I say new, because I left in '79 when I graduated, but if you ever see the courthouse, the federal courthouse, and the jail in Savannah on Broughton Street in Bull, you know where you lost. Those were commercial properties. And in order to have a sense of historical preservation, it just couldn't be residential. And I know you're going to say, well, we got commercial and commercial zoning today, but I just wanted you to know where this framework came from. What if we have an old blacksmith shop that's sitting there that hasn't been used, had an old business, and now the guy's using it as a barn? How do we get those homeowners incentivized? And the word incentive, I know that came up in one of the conversations, was actually in the original ordinance, and we removed it because we didn't want to feel like there was some sort of monetary gain or loss in the process. How do we incentivize those homeowners to save that blacksmith shop or that old country store or maybe whatever that use was? That was our thought process. I can tell you we didn't speak about specific properties. We didn't try to step our foot in the middle of an old battle. That wasn't our goal or intention. We were trying to create a framework that would fit for the entire city for historical preservation. Residential was pretty clear. We used the Georgia language that was provided to us. We wordsmithed it a little bit with legal counsel's help. Prior use, we wanted to have an opportunity to bring that into the fold. And that's how we got to where we are today. Once again, I want to just make clear, the Historical Preservation Commission has no authority to approve any property to be an historical structure. That designation, that authority and power rests with our elected officials and city council. It's not meant to usurp zoning. It's meant to be a strong and powerful usage to create historical properties. But ultimately, the elected officials and city council have the power to say yes or no. We only recommend that the commission that would be formed from this ordinance recommends. There was one question about penalties, incentives, are there any teeth? We wanted to create a framework in order to get historical preservation alive and approved as an ordinance in the city. We knew that the city council could come back at another time and create penalties and further incentives. We didn't think it was within our jurisdiction to ask for tax rebates or tax incentives. I think that's the city council's territory. We were looking for a framework at the 30,000-foot level for historical preservation, and we kept to that agenda. As far as legal language, I know there's one question came up about legal language. 95% of the language came right out of Georgia's recommended historical preservation ordinance. It might be more than 95%. We wordsmithed a little bit of that was vague. We felt was vague for our purposes here in the city of Milton. Some of it, the prior use language, Ken Gerard was there, wrote it with us. So we had legal counsel. We didn't write it. That's, I guess, my point. We didn't write it. So that's my points and comments regarding the ordinance. We're proud of it. We worked hard on it. It's a very passionate group of people behind us, and I will let them have comments as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, anybody else care to comment before we begin our discussion? No? Okay, thank you. Robin, before we do continue, I realize I entirely overlooked the fact that we didn't have any public comment. Gentlemen, is there anybody here this evening who would intend to speak to something other than the agenda on the historic preservation ordinance? No, okay. As such, may I have a motion to close public comment that we didn't really have?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Now we're sort of legally in position to go ahead. Okay. Mr. Hancock, thank you for your comments. I assure you we'll take those into consideration, and we appreciate some of the clarification that you brought forward tonight. I know that you were represented by one individual from the your team last time, and he did an excellent job of trying to give us the benefit of one man's perspective on it, and he had 5 of us, asking questions. He did his best to make sure that we understood as best as he could that night, and then obviously there were more questions that came forward, so we appreciate your coming this evening to help us. I guess I would open the discussion to the fact that there are a number of components that I think we need to address tonight, not least of which is the prior use component of it. I personally have some questions I'd like to bring forward and discuss about standards within the ordinance, guidelines, if any, that we can be used. And, Mr. Hancock, in your presentation to us and your opening comments to us tonight, I had the benefit of what you guys put forward, and I think there's some good work in there, and I do recognize that it reflects a lot of the state of Georgia perspective on it as well, and look forward to making sure that whatever we do adopt, that it is befitting Milton as we're trying to preserve it. And one of the questions I still have is, we talked about things coming before the Historic Preservation Board for review, but when it gets there, one of the things I still have question about, I'm sure I am speaking for some other members of the Planning Commission, is what is it that you'll actually measure when it gets there? What constitutes that it is historic? I don't know that we've defined that for the current verbiage in the ordinance. And you suggested it does go back to the mayor and council for final approval. Again, I would ask that same question. What we need to consider guidelines that are given to them that is a real clear definition of what is determined historic. I mean, if you think about Greater Milton, my own naive perspective on it is that we don't have a lot of historic places based on events in our American history. I mean, we're trying to preserve a place in time, I think, by some of the structures that are out there. I think that there are structures that are representative of what Milton has grown from and to today that are absolutely worth preserving. I know that there are some locations, Cherokee Rock in particular comes to mind. I think I've heard it referred to that. I don't know if that's the official name for it, that may have some historic value in terms of a battleground or a location where there was tribal residence at one point. But I don't know enough about that and look forward to the benefit of other people's knowledge to better understand that. So I guess that my point being, because I'm searching, I'm searching because I didn't see some of those things that I would look for as definitive things to the mayor and council to hang their hat on as well in making determinations to what is historic and what isn't, and how do they make that measure. I guess let me ask for others to make comments from the panel before, and maybe give you a couple more things to respond to. Any other opening comments?
Go ahead, George.
No, go ahead first.
I was just going to say, I don't know what the discussion outline is going to be, but I've got a couple of questions about prior use, their understanding of the issue that we have, and so on. If we want to pile all that stuff together, that's fine, or we can wait.
I think maybe let's start with a discussion of prior use, and that's gotten most attention, I think, from
Could I ask a question before we get to that?
Sure.
If you don't mind. I apologize. I wasn't here at the last meeting, so I don't have the benefit of the discussion. But, Mark, in listening to what you said about the structuring of the proposed ordinance following the model that's provided by the state, two things, I guess, and there's probably more, but two things jumped out at me. One is that the whole idea of prior use is not even mentioned in the state model ordinance, so I'm curious about where that concept came from and how that came into being. Secondly, the state model ordinance has a requirement that before anything is officially designated as historic, that it has to be approved by the state. And I don't see that in this ordinance at all. The ordinance that's been developed for Milton keeps it completely within the context of Milton as whether something's approved or not. So I'm curious about that again. If the intent was to follow the state ordinance, I'm not sure why some things were added and some things were deleted. And I'm not questioning that. I just would like to understand the why behind it, if you could help me with that.
Any other questions on that topic before we invite Mark back to the podium?
I guess I have something that's kind of along those same lines, and that I know you had said that you guys were kind of looking at it from a 30,000 feet level, and part of what we're charged with is to get it, city ordinance ready, and one of the things that I had a concern with was, and this kind of goes back, I guess, a little bit with what George was saying, but the commission's power to adopt rules and standards, and it talked about the flexibility the commission shall have the flexibility to adopt rules and standards without amendment to this ordinance. And so if we're, using a model that's, follows the state guidelines, or we'd rather tailor it more to, something that fits Milton better, how will you come up with those rules and standards without them being part of the ordinance? Because it seems like it gets out of the way the ordinances, are supposed to work for the city. So that would be my question, kind of, in addition.
Any other questions along those lines, or is that, Curtis, did we get your question in?
Well, he's the prior use, which I think might be a whole
Same.
Okay.
discussion.
Joe?
I just have a question on the appeals section. It talks about appeals to the city council, and the city council may approve, modify, or reject determination by the commission if the governing body finds the commission abused its discretion. And that's the only basis for reversing the decision of the commission. And I'm a little bit concerned about that provision. It seems to me the city council has a final say regardless of what the reason may be.
I'm sorry, what?
It's on page 16.
5M. Section 5M.
Okay. Mark, would you care to come back, or actually, you're all invited to speak, as you may have one strength versus another.
I think I lost the vote. I think they. Joe, the way I understand it and the way it's supposed to be written, if we need to have language change, is that the city council, our elected officials, have the final say on any appeal. And I don't think there's one of us that think otherwise. Standards, we had two questions on that. The language that's in here is right out of the state. I don't think we changed. I can't remember we looked at this stuff so many times, but I don't think we changed a word on it. And I'm going to talk about a structure, not a district, but it's on page 8 on my report. My report has the edits in the side, so it might be page 7. Paragraph D, designation of historic property, criteria for selection of historic properties, individual building, structure, site, or object being worthy of preservation by reason of value to the nation, state, or city for at least one of the following reasons. And the criteria is an outstanding example of a structure representative of its era. It is one of the few remaining examples of past architectural style or type over 50 years old. It is a place or structure associated with an event or persons of historical, cultural significance to the city, state, or region. It is a site of natural, archaeological, aesthetic interest that is continuing to contribute to the cultural, historical development and heritage of the municipality, county, state, or region. That's right out of the state language. You might want to say it's vague. I don't know. It does leave the door open. For D, the Cherokee Rock Formation. Is that what we call it, Cherokee Rock? I haven't seen it yet, so. But I think it's probably wise to keep it somewhat in written. First off, as part of the state language, you don't get caught into customizing and creating a problem. You have the opportunity to say no at the city council level, always. And just because something is 50 years old doesn't really mean it's historic. I mean, it might not really fit the bill. But I hope I answered your question. It's written. This is how it's written in here. But I think on a general basis, it's a 50-year-old structure in our city. It has to have some sort of historical significance. So I hope I answered your question. George, you had two questions. I can't answer I can't remember why we didn't require state approval. I don't think we're asking for that in the ordinance. I think we're asking for City of Milton preservation approval and not going through the state. But I can't recall. I don't remember taking any language of that sort out. The prior use, how it started, I can't tell you how the conversation started. It was one of the nights that we met, and I think just it was brought up, well, what if we have a blacksmith shop or what a county store? And what do we do, and how do we keep homeowners in these structures, in our thinking, had no residential usage, couldn't be rehabbed in residential. How do we keep these structures from being demolished or deteriorating under this preservation ordinance? So I thought it was very smart on the people who brought it up.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. I guess since I went first, let me respond first. So, thank you for. I was aware of it is on page 8 in our with regard to the designation of historic property. It is section D on page 8 in our document, and you addressed the top line for me, and thank you for doing that. And you also hit the nail on the head as to why I had a concern, which is it did strike me as relatively vague, and I'm not looking for reasons to not qualify something as historic, because I obviously, as a believer in what Milton is and trying to preserve it as best we can, would look forward to us finding ways to identify things as historic. What I didn't want, or I guess my concern, though, is to make sure that we do have something we can hang our hat on. And you did say, and I agree, that it goes back to the mayor and council for final approval. But I don't want it to be something that's whimsical. I want it to be something that they can say, points 1 through 4, identify it as legitimate for those reasons, but it's missing on 6 and 7 and whatever. And I guess I just was looking for something a little bit more definitive than that. And maybe there is good reason why it's not. I just didn't comprehend that prior to that. But I appreciate your comments for, I guess, my additional consideration. George, you want to go next?
I would share, I guess, Paul's concern about the vagueness. Mark, I also would point out that the language, I mean, again, I don't know the history, but the language in Part B of that, where the 50-year designation is indicated, is not in the model ordinance for the state. It's been added, I assume, by the committee. So there must have been some thought or discussion about making it more specific. And my concern is, as Paul said, is I'd like to see a set of criteria that make a property qualifying or not qualifying something that anybody reading the ordinance would be able to understand, so that discretion is taken out of the equation to as large a degree as possible. My particular concern is with respect to modifications to properties that may meet these criteria, and if in fact because property in my mind could satisfy these criteria and still have been modified in a way that to me it's no longer historic, and I don't see anything in here that allows a property technically to be disqualified. So to me there's some criteria for what it could not be that seem to be missing from this list. And so that's one point. The other point, I go back to what I said before. I misspoke. The model ordinance is not where the requirement for state approval is captured. It's actually captured in the state ordinance, the state law that codifies the ability to create a historic preservation commission. And it is in the ordinance, but the state law that empowers this commission to be created in the first place has a requirement that the state approve historic designations. And so, Robin, I'm not trying to put the guys on the committee on the spot. That's not fair. I'd like to get an opinion from the city's legal counsel as to why that requirement has been removed from here.
Are you finished?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mark.
George, we didn't have an attorney on the
I know.
on the committee. We know you're an attorney, and we appreciate whatever you can do to make sure that, I don't know state code. So,
George,
That's what I said. I'm not trying to put you guys on the spot. I mean, you were advised, or somebody who drafted this removed it, and I just would like to understand
we had so many
why.
conversations, I can't even remember.
Sure.
So it could have been, and can't remember. We can appreciate any help that you can give us in making this work. We don't have all the exact answers. We're not soothsayers on how to write an ordinance, and any help that you can give us in codifying this more black and white manner, we'd appreciate. I think discretion.
I don't want to mislead you. I want to make it work too. I'm not trying to
I think we
make this not work. I want to make it work.
So any help that y'all can give as far as language, we appreciate. And
Joe, did you want to come back to your question?
No, I think it was answered. I think it's agreed that that language probably needs to change, and that it's just a simple matter of city council having the final say.
Okay. Carrie, Curtis?
I just want to reiterate that I think I speak for everybody that we'd all like to see this ordinance go through and, see more preservation in our city. And we appreciate all the work you did on it. And every time we get an ordinance that we've had to go through and change, it's painful to watch. I mean, we go through and we're like, wait, and we turn every sentence inside out, and we're, grateful for our two attorneys on our commission. And so it's definitely no offense to the work that you guys have done. And we also know what it's like to be volunteer citizens sitting at a table trying to put something great together for the city. And so bear with us.
Curtis?
Are we into prior use
Well,
discussion?
we can be.
Or should we start?
I'm just suggesting, if there's any other technical things, because maybe to deal with those technical things outside of the prior use, and then we'll get those out of the way, and then we can talk about. That's just a suggestion for
And
organizing.
should we start at the top like we do with other?
We can.
Page
Does
one,
anybody have
page
any
two.
objection to doing
Or-
that? Okay, well, I guess let's start at the beginning. Start with page one. Does anybody have any comment or addition, deletion to?
I saw George's marked up copy over there when I was back. You might as well just hand it to me.
Travis wants to comment.
Apologize for being late. Y'all were asking about the criteria for 50 years or older. That was drawn from the survey that was taken by North Fulton back in 95 and 96, was all structures 40 years in age or greater. So we just moved up to the next, added a decade to it. Because I can tell you in that time there's probably no more structures that weren't already covered that have become historic. And
There
you
was
have to have a starting point somewhere.
There was a rumor that it was made 50 years so that I would be included as a historic structure.
Well, we haven't voted on that yet.
Yeah, but with all the changes.
Yeah, I believe that's for the 50 years.
All the
You
changes
would-
we had done, you wouldn't qualify anymore.
You wouldn't get a certificate of appropriateness.
I want a certificate, that's right.
It's already started. No.
That's right, it's real slow.
One question for me that comes up on page one and is going to come up throughout here, I guess, and I really would kind of like to get a perspective. I remember looking at that list that Fulton County put together a while ago. I can't recite it, but I remember it. Is it the opinion of the committee that worked on this ordinance that there are historic districts in the city, or just historic properties and sites?
George, in all respect, I don't think the committee can answer that question.
Well, the reason I'm
We
asking,
just write the ordinance, and I want to make sure everyone understands, we're an ordinance writing committee, not the commission.
understand.
And maybe they can answer that, but we have one function only, and that's to deliver an ordinance with your hopeful approval to city council. And the decisions of the commission down the road, whether they're on it or whoever, I can't speak.
I think we're just trying to get a sense of the intention.
Of historical
Um,
districts.
I'll let Travis, these guys know every building in the city of Milton.
Districts. I guess if you look at North Fulton County, once Milton County, in a historical aspect, it was made of different communities. Crossroad communities is what we call them. We have Crabapple Crossroads, we have the Birmingham Crossroads. You also had areas around here like Webb, Georgia, Hopewell, Freemansville, Fields Crossroads, of course, once again, Birmingham and Crabapple. So when you look at district really just find like a tighter geographical area. We already have a Crabapple overlay district. It would probably fit somewhere in there. You would have a Crabapple historic district where you have a cluster or more dense area of possible historic structures. You know, how to define that district, I don't know, but Crabapple would probably be the only example in this area. Say Alpharetta, not really quite any examples. Roswell, you'd have the historic Roswell area down there, the Roswell Square, would fit into like their type historical district, being is it Canton Street, I believe. That area would be a historical district. There is a higher density of historical structures.
You know, when I read some of the examples that Robin had forwarded to us today, and the two that come into mind, one was Savannah, another one was Fairfax. And when I read those, and they were very explicit by, one was by street name, and one was by this may be wrong terminology, but it was like a GIS map where it said, by this coordinate to this coordinate, and then this coordinate to this coordinate. And when I think about Milton, I can't think of a district that we could define that way. Like you said, Travis, I think the closest we would have probably is Crabapple, where there maybe are 3 or 4 structures there.
Loosely defined, possibly up to a dozen, but tightly, more likely about 5 or 6, yes.
Yeah, okay.
If you're looking for a better local example, Dahlonega might work. The square at Dahlonega, I believe they define it. I'd have to look at it, but they have more tighter definitions on it, like literally like a circumference from the center of the square.
Yeah, exactly.
Type of deal.
And so, to George's point, I struggle with whether or not we could designate within Milton a historic district, other than thinking about it in the context of a density of structures.
Right. And like Mark stated, that's really whatever the commission decides. I can just give you an example of what I might consider.
Well, the reason I'm asking the question, aside from cleaning up the ordinance, is that the concern I have is that if we consider that there are historic districts, and if the commission has the authority with the council's approval to designate a historic district, that brings with it additional, I'll say restrictions for lack of a better word, on development that can occur within that district.
Not necessarily.
Well, the way the ordinance is written, it does.
The way it was explained to us by the attorney, and just reading through it, was that the only buildings covered by this historic district would be the buildings within that district that are considered historic. And I don't know that it would really affect zoning or anything like that.
The way the ordinance is written, it could. And so, to your point, if the intent is to just protect those buildings within a district that are historic, then you really don't need the district designation. You can have the properties individually protected by the ordinance. That's the only reason I was asking.
Yeah, I guess to that point, it almost become a tourism type deal.
Right.
Instead of an actual legislation.
That's right. You can do all the structures as historic structures. You don't have to mess with the district. Ultimately, the commission has to recommend council approve.
Right.
It's an option. We're just giving the city the option to do that. Probably a rare chance to do that.
So you guys wouldn't suffer any heartache if we struck district, for example, just as an example?
Why would you want to?
Well, I guess for some of the...
In the future, maybe some historical evidence is uncovered about some buildings, and it may be something the city would like to do.
Council would like to do it and instruct in the ordinance.
guess I wouldn't want to hamstring anything that could possibly happen 100 years down the road, where we do have a road that hasn't been touched. Good luck at this point. But 100 years down the road, where we do have a district, which by that time is considered historic. Well, not right now. It's not. It's considered present day.
100 years down the road, my house will be historic.
And Curtis will still be historic.
Curtis, any comment?
Yeah, I was just going to comment. In Roswell, the historic district is geometric, geographic, not specific to buildings. Some of the buildings over there have been torn down and replaced, sometimes in replica. But personally, even though it's more restrictive and may not be politically attractive, I like the notion of protection. It's a much higher level of restriction on everything. The signed ordinance is different. All kinds of extra requirements on anything done in their historic district, and the intention obviously is to protect it for the long run. It does it. It's a pain in the neck, but it works. The problem is in Milton, as we know, there's only one cluster of buildings, and it's so small. It's hard to say, but it might make sense, and I think I agree. I can't remember who said it. Maybe it was Gordon, but that in my mind at least, even if all we did was designate an area in the future, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future, and anything new had to conform to old criteria, you could basically generate a sense of what had been there just by replicating what little started. And anyway, it's just my own opinion and maybe an answer to your question, Gordon. I'm not sure why we wouldn't.
I'm Noah Broadwell, and with a name like Broadwell, you know I'm interested in the history. I live at 105 Christopher Run. I think it's going to be a very difficult thing to talk about historic districts. I agree with Mr. Ragsdale as he looks at the designation of properties. What is the initial impetus there to do those things? What you see here is basically what has been followed by several historical societies and so forth. I can give you our example. I'm past president of the Alpharetta Historical Society, and we have moved to get that old log cabin on the old campus on the National Register. The criteria basically would be the general process. But like everything else, the devil's in the details. And it takes a lot of work to justify a building based on even architecture. What you're going to find mostly now when people talk about these things, we're talking about vernacular architecture. We're not talking about Georgian or anything like that in these areas. Our areas that we have, Crabapple, does not have the charm, obviously, it had 50 years ago or even in the 1800s when my folks came here. But we also could look at Webb. There's still some things we could do at the Webb Center over there with developing some things. I look at it more.
What's Webb? What are you referring to as Webb?
Where we are right now. Down the street here at the intersection of
where that old chimney is out there.
There was the gin. There was the general store.
Yeah.
There was right across the angle over here was the schoolhouse.
Yeah.
So we can dig out things like that to give some historic flavor. And I think at this stage, as we look, I agree with what we said about the future. I would hate to see us shut down and narrow our perspective based on what we have at this point. My view is that we need to develop a strong historic flavor. If you look at Milton as a fabric, what is going to be the historic fabric of this town? And history doesn't stop at municipal boundaries either. So we know those things. So we can pull a lot of things like that to develop these things. When we did the log cabin, we brought in a young lady who was working on her degree in archaeology of old buildings. She measured every inch of that building, up, down, inside, out. We have a bound volume that we have presented on them. So that's the type of thing that we can stimulate in terms of looking at what we want to have here. Districts, I think, is beyond what we need to look at right now. We can identify points of historic points of interest, which we did with Linda Blow about a year or two ago. The Kelly Plantation down on Hopewell Plantation. Kelly Plantation has a tremendous history there. And we need to look also beyond actual structures. There are other aspects of history out here that we can develop. Once we get Providence Park cleared up, there's another opening right there. So I appreciate you listening to a little historian ramble, but that's what I see. And we came into this with a love of history. We understand the complexities of all the other levels of what we have here and the progress we've made in the city, and we want this to have its particular niche to it. So I appreciate your interest tonight. And if we can help you in other ways, we'll be glad to. If we need to rewrite some of this, point the way. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, George, recognizing that there's some passion for the district component, does that satisfy your question about that it should stay, or do you believe that it's inconsistent with what we are as a city?
I don't have any objection to it staying. I mean, I think the people that have spoken make a good point about the possibility of those things being there. But to me, it still ultimately goes back to, if we don't have any kind of clear guidelines for when that can be created or when it can't, my concern is, and it's no reflection on anybody here because they aren't the commission. We don't know who the commission is, right? It's the idea of 7 people that are going to be appointed having the discretion to impose a set of restrictions on other people's property without having clear guidelines for when that's appropriate. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about, right? I mean, if the city wants to buy a property and call it historic, that's one thing. But this is allowing the city to go to someone who possesses a piece of property and say, that's historic, and therefore there are things you can and can't do. And whether it's the intent or not, when a district is defined, it does impose, to Curtis's example with Roswell, it does impose different, I won't say restrictions, but different requirements on property that's developed within that historic area that, again, it's raising the bar of what may otherwise be required in that area. So I don't have any problem with the idea of a district being a provision in here if there's clear criteria for when a district can be established. I mean, I read the definition that's in here, and I agree it's right out of the state ordinance, but literally interpreted, it says that it requires a geographically definable area possessing a significant concentration, linkage, or continuity of sites, buildings, structures, or objects. All the things that were just described, if those objects are not here anymore, then there isn't any opportunity for that. So, again, it's making sure the criteria are clear is my biggest concern, not whether we have a provision for doing that or not.
Sites. It could be anything if you say sites.
Well, I think we're on the same wavelength, George. I'm looking for a way to make sure that our ability to define something of value and historic to us is probably, in my mind, as liberal as possible, so that you're more inclusive than you are exclusive. But I'm still struggling with district on the hypothetical than I am with an example that we can use to say definitively today this is what it is. Travis, you have a comment?
Well, I'm thinking along y'all's lines of thought that within a district there are contributing and non-contributing structures that we can't just literally go out there and say, your building's historic, without the owner's permission. So if the owner was not to give permission, while that building could reside in the district, it would become a non-contributing structure because the owner doesn't wish it to be declared historic.
Where's that language, the non-contributing? Is that on?
Non-contributing, well, I'm sorry, I have a draft.
Is
copy,
that
but
in
it's under
section
section
C,
4.
district?
Look under 4C, I believe it's before you get to the designation of a historic property. It's under the district, but not under the
What page are you on? Are these generally? What?
We're pretty much the same pages, I don't think.
Oh, I see. Evaluation of properties with historic districts. Individual properties within historic districts shall be classified as contributing.
I'm not there yet. Where are you?
Top of page 8. 3.
Yes.
Oh, all right.
But then later on in section 5A, page 12, it says that after the designation by ordinance of historic property or of a historic district, no material change in the appearance of such historic property or of a contributing or non-contributing building, structure, site, or object within such historic district shall be made or permitted to be made without, by the owner. It goes on, without approval by the commission. So it takes in,
Yes, I haven't seen that before, thank you. Yes.
so the creation of the district brings everything in under the commission.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying there. To me, that the non-contributing building being ruled by this ordinance would need to be stricken.
Would need to be what?
Stricken from that. I mean, it would have to, what Joe's saying is on page 12 in section 5A, it says, after the designation by ordinance of a historic property or of a historic district, no material change in the appearance of such historic property or of a contributing or non-contributing building, structure, site, or object. I would think that non-contributing building needs to be removed, or the words non-contributing.
This is exactly how Roswell's historic district is defined. Contributing, non-contributing, it doesn't matter.
Right, and the way I look at it, though, would be as if we declared, just for example, we declared Crabapple historic, and then we told the gas station owner he can't change the sign.
Right.
I definitely see Joe's point on that one.
But what if the gas station wanted to, he was considered non-contributing and he wanted to turn into an Arby's?
Yeah. I mean, Joe, aren't you arguing the other way? That as a non-contributing?
I mean, I can see it both ways.
Well, what if, to your point, Carrie, and Curtis, I'm sorry, I recognize you next having raised your hand. Not to allow in a district, an established district, land or a structure owner to declare himself a non-participating, or what is it called, non-contributing entity. And to use the example of the Crabapple as our district, and in the white building that's in Crabapple that is the antique building, or was, decides it's going to be a non-contributing building. It has some period appearance to us. It has some architectural features to it, and they decide they're going to be non-contributing, and then it's in the district. Does it? If it were not forbidden by other reasons in Crabapple, they could decide they wanted to be an Arby's and then do it.
Well, that depends on who decides whether they're contributing or non-contributing.
Right. Right.
And
if
how
the homeowner, if
arbitrary
the property
that
owner
could be.
has that decision to make,
I
I struggle with that.
Yeah, I don't think it's.
My thought on that letter A would be that the certificate of appropriateness would not need to come from the commission if it was non-contributing building. The certificate of appropriateness would have to come from whoever it goes before now.
Yeah.
If it's a non-contributing structure. I mean, if you've already got a non-contributing structure, what control do you have over it anyway? And more than likely, and I see your example, I would think the non-contributing structure would more than likely be the gas station. And of course, the historic commission, to my opinion, would not want to tell them what they could or could not do.
Right.
So.
Okay. Curtis?
Yeah, a couple of unrelated points. Non-contributing, what that meant to me was one that didn't adhere to the criteria for historic structure. And examples are Shell Station in the case of, well, I guess it's happening in Crabapple now too, but in tear-down rebuilds, where they may or may not fit criteria. But the point I was going to make was that I understand George's point now. The historic districts that I've been involved with were all already in place. I've never seen a situation where one was declared to be overlaid, and restriction probably wasn't the wrong word to use. I'm not sure what the thresholds would be to place the restrictions, but they certainly are restrictions in Roswell and in another community that I'm involved in there, and I question whether that's legal under Georgia law to retrofit restrictions on property rights.
I don't want to mislead. I don't think it's retrofitting restrictions on current property owners, but it is putting a higher level of criteria, if you will, with respect to any development that would take place in there after that designation.
Okay, I think that's the same thing, isn't it?
Well,
Essentially,
that
or
property
not?
owner bought it with the intent to develop at a later date.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the timing issue, but I mean, yeah, you could argue that it's the same thing. I mean, to me, it's different than saying, coming to you who owns the property and say, you need to do this, right? Versus here's an undeveloped piece of property or a property that you want to raise and redevelop, and saying if you're going to redevelop it, you've got to redevelop it differently than you would if this were not a historic district.
Well, all I'm saying, and I don't want to overcomplicate this, but every situation that I've been involved in where property rights were limited in the state of Georgia law didn't allow it. And I'm sure there are examples where that's not true, but property rights in Georgia law, and I'm no attorney, you guys are smarter than I am, but a pretty strong property rights state. Anyway.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments about that? So having aired that out, we're still back on page 1 with the question about district. Does it stay or go with the discussion that we've had? I would present that for discussion.
George, do you feel if we left it in, is there a way in which we can write criteria for that? We can't. I mean, that's what I have a problem with, I guess.
I mean, you know, at the end of the day, do we want the designation to be in the eye of the beholder, right? Which means whoever those 7 people are, or do we want the designation to be based on a set of guidelines that everybody in the community understands and accepts as the basis for defining that?
Well, that's a hard question.
Yeah, I know.
And that's one that I struggle with coming into the meeting. There's a couple parts to that question. I recognize that the mayor and council created the ordinance writing body, and you guys, and they selected a great list of people who have a passion for this, and I think you guys have done some good work to get us to this point, recognizing that we're now taking pokes at it, but it's a good starting point. But I would ask that even the larger question is, does that body then be recreated as hypothetically as the board, or does it fall back to another review board that we already have in place as well, which is the design review board, that is also accustomed to dealing with those kinds of questions and assessments before them. So I'm not proposing that for discussion now, but I would just ask that question for consideration at some point in our review of the document. Is it the right thing to do to create another board with another set of measures on top of what we do have today in existence, which is the design review board, that may also be appropriately equipped to handle that, provided in the mix of that board there are some people who share the same passion or have some of the same expertise that may be part of the body assembled to create the ordinance. Just food for thought. So Mark, you have a comment?
Just want to, George, the imposition or the designation is the better term comes from City Council. I know it was my one thing I wanted to say over and over again tonight, not from the commission of 7 people that you don't know. It comes from City Council and the mayor, elected officials commission is made up from their designated and approved, city council approved. Ultimately, the 100% authority of designating either a district or a structure comes from our elected officials and not from the commission.
You're right.
Okay. Okay, well, how about for the objective of maybe moving forward, let's table the discussion of the district component for now and see if we bump into any issues as we continue forward in the document. All right, anybody disagree with that?
Nope.
All right. Any other comments or questions on page 1? Okay.
How about, are we going to do spelling and?
Typos, we're going to go through.
We can.
I had them.
Okay.
We are?
We are.
Sure. We might as well.
For
Just fix the word application on page 1,
Right.
section
that's-
2A.
Yeah.
And I have, it says certificates, the first paragraph, an ordinance to create, on the 4th line, or certificates
Yeah, okay.
instead of,
You don't know where a certificate is?
that's what my daughter used to call it. It's kind of funny because
It's not certificates, it's certificates.
my daughter used to
get
ask
the
for gift
So you got the
certificates.
emphasis on the correct
For
syllable?
Christmas.
Is that how that works?
And then, should it say of before?
I think some versions have of. I fixed it and some and some got
For
out. It should be
issuance or-
certificates of.
Yeah, it should be of. That's what I
To
thought.
provide issuance of,
Certificates.
yeah, it's of. Yeah.
Okay.
Wait, to provide for
Of certificates.
issuance of certificates of appropriate. Yeah, it's a little odd, but that's correct.
Okay.
Oh, wait, which one is correct?
On the 4th line to say to provide for issuance of certificates of appropriateness.
Okay, so it is of, and it is certificates.
Yeah, but that was spelled wrong.
Yeah, okay, got it.
But yeah, I'm looking at the of before certificates, not the of after.
Right, but it's of before and of after.
Yeah.
It used to be or
Yeah, I
at
got
one
it.
point, but then I didn't
On
see
mine
the
it says,
certificates.
on mine it still says or.
Okay, and then Joe's catch on the bottom, under definitions, A, application, that was your comment, Joe?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You going to keep going on the spelling, Joe?
Sure, we might as well. Okay, page 2, or is there more, Fred, on page 1?
No.
Okay, page 2. Questions, comments, concerns, starting at the top.
Building is.
Building.
Yeah, I
stuff
think
to
some
get.
of it's in
I
the.
think it's way
It's
that-
in the document word when it,
Yeah, because
Right.
it's skipping.
but we'll fix it.
Okay.
Okay, and in D, historic district comes up again. It's not inconsistent if we leave page 1 intact, but I would just make note that it does address district within page 2D, under designation, but to make sure that we catch those if we are going to make any changes to that we catch it throughout. Okay, any other comments on B through G? Well, G is obviously district again. Okay. I'm going to propose that we table discussion of H as an issue for right now and come back to that and continue to work forward on the other.
I've got, I'm sorry, on D, do we need to call it the Historic Preservation Commission call it out the same way every time? I noticed it's called in C, they say Historic Preservation Commission, and then on D, they just say Preservation Commission. I don't know if that matters in the definition.
And then as such, does it have to be capitalized and recognized that way throughout?
Does that matter, or is it?
Should be.
Yeah.
It should be said the same way every time.
You could create a definition of the Historic Preservation Commission as HPC or something to shorten it, but
Or say the
other than
commission.
that,
Yeah.
or call it the commission, but it's got to be defined.
Okay.
Robin, do you have a preference as to how we address that?
Whatever your,
I mean, it can be in
Let's
the
say-
opening.
Let's say
under def-
HPC.
I mean, yeah, you could just do a new definition, add a definition, and just call it what you just defined it as the HPC.
Or just say commission.
Or commission. Although, I think I like the HPC just in case it gets confused with any other
Planning commission, yeah, or another, yeah.
All right, well then, I would propose that because this is organized alphabetically, that we add Historic Preservation Commission.
You don't need a new definition. Just put it as a parenthetical after Historic Preservation Commission in C, and then you're
Yeah,
done.
the first time it appears, right?
Oh,
Do it in A.
Yeah.
That was an A, and then-
Or do you do it at the
Actually, it's
very
in the
top?
recital.
Yeah, at the very top, first line. Is that just?
You know, eventually that we may, let's do it in one. We can go ahead and do it in the preamble, but none of our other ordinances start out that way. I think eventually when we get this finalized, that may be.
Start out what way, with the
Yeah.
recital?
Yeah. All the other don't. They're not organized that way. I'm just saying, let's go ahead and do it in that one as well as in
Okay.
A, just in case we lose it at some point. Not lose it, but
So
reorganize
you're saying do it in the preamble, do it again in A?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just for safety's sake.
But then not take.
And then what'll happen is
No,
we end
we
up
don't do it.
pushing it down so it's not at the, it'll probably end up not looking that way. It'll probably still be the first, but it may not be organized that way, if that makes sense. If you look at all the rest of ordinances. See, this is because it's a model ordinance, that's just what they threw up there. So it's not really how we organize our ordinances.
Right.
I'm just
okay.
saying it could not be so obviously at the top.
All right.
I mean, it could be at the top, but maybe not at all caps. I'll just make sure it's only done once at the end, so,
All right.
at the end of the process.
And then are you suggesting that preempts the necessity for adding what would be between G and H as a definition?
Yeah, that's what George and them were saying.
All right. Everybody in agreement?
Mhm.
Okay. All right, any other comments on page 2?
The reference in I should be to section 4D, not 4C.
I'm sorry.
4D,
4D.
Roman numeral 4D, not 4C.
Okay. Okay, page 3. Any comments, additions, questions?
K has to be corrected under object.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I was working on that.
K, it's, again, that same thing. It's
Okay.
And
I think
3B, on that same page.
Yeah, something like that.
And that
Oh, it does.
position should be lowercase p.
I-
Under 3B.
I'm sorry, where are we?
On 3B, the P
Okay.
in position should be,
I have a couple of substantive questions about J, and I mean, this is probably what we're going to have a problem with, because, in all
Yeah.
fairness to the guys out there, I don't know whether they want to speak to these or not, but I look at the definition of material change in appearance, and it's defined as a change that will affect either the exterior architectural or environmental features of blah, 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 blah. And then they give some examples of that. I don't know that I understand what number 4 means. It says a change in the location of advertising visible from the public right-of-way. I don't understand that.
I guess my best examples of that, Mr. Rocco, would be perhaps a historic building that is also commercial. Say if you have something that has an overhanging sign, and then, once again, Crabapple comes back to our best example, the Broadwell building, 2-story brick building on the corner that had a sign in one spot, it was to be moved or altered.
Yeah, that's what I thought of when I read it.
Okay.
or you have a barn with those historic paintings on it.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand. So
Yeah.
we're suggesting that using the Broadwell building at Crabapple as the example, the painting itself can be designated as historic, and as
Signage.
Well, the signage, and then I gave an example of
Right.
the painting of a barn, historic barn that's,
Right, so we're suggesting that a change of that painting or signage would be considered a material change and could compromise its designation as historic. Is that the correct interpretation? I'm seeing some nods. Mark? Okay.
You'd be subject to the penalties if you made a material change without asking for the certificate of approval.
Okay.
Should we make that clear?
It seems clear to
Well,
me.
I mean, I understand what you guys said. I just didn't read that way when I read it, so that's why I raised it.
I had the same thing underlined with a question mark.
Well, it's,
If that's clear to everybody else, let it go. I'm not trying to.
It wasn't to me, and it
Yeah.
wasn't to Carrie, and it wasn't to you
no,
originally.
it was to me, but it wasn't to the other. I mean, I think maybe we should
Well,
find.
it's clear the way
It was
Travis
described.
described it, you know,
Wait,
with
we're
the
getting
painting
the
and
benefit
that.
of
Now,
that.
how do you say that?
What
You
if
know,
somebody's
just the
sitting
word-
here 2 years from now and it's not
Right.
this panel and not,
Mhm. What's it?
and not those guys in the audience to help explain it?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of another example anywhere.
Well, I think,
I think Robin's example is good too.
well, the paint, you know, the
Well,
old drugstore that has the painting of Coca-Cola that's been there since, can't think of it, down in Decatur.
What if we just made it simple and said a change or a modification or change in the location of signage or that's attached to a historic building?
Can we also say not just location, but removal? Because wouldn't that be,
Removal,
wouldn't that be a?
That's a modification.
I guess you could think of something, say if you had a historic barber shop, it's got the candy cane, I call it the candy cane.
Barber pole.
But if that was removed, if that was,
Right.
or moved,
right.
a historic gas station, pumps, whatnot.
Yeah, but
Why-
see, I would argue that neither one of those, that's my concern. If that's the intent, neither one of those to me is advertising.
Perhaps no
Really?
line.
You think a gas pump is advertising?
No, not necessarily.
Well, the barber pole is.
Barber
but
pole
that's
is.
An exception.
Okay.
I have to go to Bob's I'll concede, you can say it.
Okay. I mean, I think our intent is the same. I just want to make sure that we've got it written so that it's all inclusive.
Yeah, I don't,
How about,
Should we call it
maybe
Signage?
call it advertising, artwork, signage.
Or
and
his-
make a
signage,
list.
artwork?
or should we say in location of historic advertising?
Well, who's
Who's going to define it?
who's defined as historic? I like the idea of, what did we just say?
I just started the list, and we said
Yeah.
advertising,
Signage.
artwork, signage.
Right. Because it could be artwork and not really be advertising.
Right, I mean, the example is on the side of the Broadwell building, isn't there a
Can we-
painting of a crab apple,
Can we
right?
put a blanket over it by just calling it aesthetic features?
Well, is that the intent here? I mean, aesthetic features could be,
Could be the type of roof, it could be
Wouldn't
the,
substituting signage for the word advertising solve the problem?
right, I was saying
well, not just
signage.
necessarily signage, because what if it's just something that's artistic?
Well, that's why I
These
said
are
we
just-
signage
these-
or artistic.
These are just examples.
Yeah.
We don't have to be real specific because it says such as. The important part of this section is the very first paragraph. Everything that comes after that is just an example.
And I agree with you, Joe, as long as we can agree that things like gas pumps are architectural or environmental features. I mean, to me, those are the two keys, right? It has to affect you, the way it's written, it has to affect either the exterior architectural or environmental features.
Why don't we just create a list?
Well, I mean, I'm with Joe. I'd rather not create a list.
Yeah, that's-
We want to make that as broad as we can. I'm questioning whether those things that we just talked about would qualify without examples of exterior architectural or environmental features. If they
Well,
do,
I think if you
then,
read on, it says, or any building, structure, site, object, or landscape.
no, it says of, right, or any. The only two things that are, to me, are the qualifiers there are, they have to affect either the exterior architectural or environmental features. And then it's of the rest of that chain, but it's those two things.
What's an Appier tenant feature?
What's a who?
Under 5. Look under 5, the second to the last
Well, I didn't
word.
get to 5. I was going
Well,
to,
I'm just trying to figure if that's a word we might be able to use. I don't know what it means yet.
I think it means
oh, pertinent, you mean?
pertinent. It's like something that sticks out
It-
or.
It's something attached to or
Oh,
part
right.
of, yeah. I was going to suggest that 5 be taken out altogether.
Expanding the vocabulary.
I mean, it just, we're jumping ahead.
Big word. I knew
I know.
Curtis would know it.
Hey, you guys,
Beat this to death on our committee, you should have joined it.
It was a really big word. I knew Curtis for sure wasn't going to understand it. Just thought I'd ask him what did you have.
you were just going up for Curtis.
Yeah, mostly for Curtis. I really knew what it meant.
That's why you pronounced it so
Yeah,
well.
exactly. I wanted to seem like I was struggling with it.
My concern, I mean, we're jumping ahead, but my concern with number 5, it goes back to the discussion we had before. If you have a district, right, the way number 5 reads, a material change in appearance, if 5 is acceptable, is the erection, alteration, restoration, removal of any buildings or other structures within an historic district.
Property or district.
Yeah, but I'm skipping the property part, because within a historic district means things that are not necessarily designated historic, right?
Right.
But they're within that geographical district. To me, that's not a material change. It gets back to the idea that if you just, let's just say hypothetically you define Crabapple geographically to be a historic district, then a change in Ozios would be deemed a material change in that historic district, right? Which I don't think is the intent.
Well, although in the list in 5, where it's defining things like walls and fences and steps, I guess the way I'm reading that is it's implying that there's an aesthetic look, feel, genre to that area.
It's implying that there could be,
Right.
but it depends on how you define that district.
Right. So,
I mean, I think, to your point, this is another one of those things where, to me, if it's pertinent to the historic property, I'm fine with that. But as soon as you say within that district, to me, it opens it up too broadly again.
The wording in this paragraph J pretty much comes from the Georgia model.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
I'm just going to y'all's point that you made at the last meeting.
Yeah.
That you made to me.
well, yeah. It's a good foundation, but it
Good start.
needs to be Miltonized. So that's where we're going.
I
Well-
tried that line last meeting. So you see, I haven't really said anything.
Put that in definitions, Miltonized.
Yeah, Miltonized.
No, when
No, it
Robin,
needs to be Ragsdaleized is what it
He has just one vote on the commission.
That's
No,
right.
All right.
he keeps
so,
promising he's going to go through the whole ordinance from.
Yeah, how late do you want to stay up tonight?
Yeah, well, we're doing a
I
good job.
told you that we've done this before.
We're only on page 3.
I told, and we've done this before. I tried to warn you in the beginning.
It gets easier as we get more tired. So,
We flip faster towards the end.
okay, so
Let's get
So
4.
we need to finish 4 before we address 5. But if we're taking 5 out, I think that 4 needs to be to the point that George made earlier or Joe made earlier. It needs to be more general so that you can, in that interpretation, include. Well, no, I'm sorry. It can't be done that way. I was going to say 4 could be inclusive of some of the things in 5, but not the way 4 is currently written, where it's really addressing a visual from the right-of-way. I'm still in favor of creating a list in 4 that, to Joe's point earlier, includes the words such as, but not necessarily inclusive, all-inclusive. I don't know how you say that.
No, it
Yeah.
does. I mean, by implication, it's not all-inclusive.
Okay.
It's just examples.
So can we?
You could say including but not limited to if you wanted to.
Okay. Curtis, do you have a comment on that particular point, or something different?
I do. I have a comment on this whole section. I've read it back through several times, and I I just don't have a problem with it. I don't understand. I don't understand where it's misleading, and in my mind, advertising has a specific meaning that's beyond signage. Advertising for the business may be some grandfathered feature on a building or something like that. It seems appropriately general to me, and signage more narrow. I'm just not struggling with any of this verbiage in J.
Okay. But would in saying that, to take a more broad brushstroke acceptance of this, would you take offense to a listing to be added in addition to the word advertising?
Well, to Joe's point, I think when you start to list, then you start to limit, and the intent was to leave it intentionally vague for interpretation, or I mean, I don't have a problem with the list either, as long as
I didn't have a problem with understanding it.
Right, but,
not that that matters.
Well, it's clear it works.
Robin's still angry for being criticized last time for saying it was state law.
What about, again, I'm really, the only part that I'm concerned about here, I don't want to leave it until we've really vetted it, is the fact that there are things that may be considered not historic today that could be considered historic in the future. And I would cite, again, the painting on the side of the Broadway building in Crabapple is the best example I can think of. Or maybe one more to that is, if you look at Alpharetta as the example. Isn't there a painting on the side of the red brick building that is across from the little
across from
pocket
the
park?
courthouse.
Yeah, across from the courthouse. It would be on...
That's a new painting.
Well, it's changed, but I'm just saying that's a new
50
painting today. But what if that painting didn't
50
change
years
for
from-
10 years and it becomes a reference point for people? Does that, if it's not changed and it becomes a reference point and it becomes something that is then there 10, 15, 20 years, does it have some historic significance? And if it's and today it's painted, I mean, it's appropriate to that business. But if there, in our case, we're in Crabapple, the painting of the Crabapple, I think has some value there. If that building were to be established as historic, and the Crabapple painting is a part of that, I want to make sure that we didn't. I want to ensure that serious consideration would be given before that painting would be allowed to change.
Totally agree.
So does advertising address,
Does
or
not.
I
I
haven't-
think, or you could add art. I mean, I think that would. I think there's so many other. I mean, like Joe said, it doesn't include everything, but maybe a
Maybe art,
change in the
etc.
location / removal of advertising and or art visible from the public right of way. I think that we get the gist of it. I think when you say art, you're going to be referencing, something on the side of the building, whether it's advertising or not.
I know we can beat this to death, but let's just say hypothetically that the art that you're talking about was on the other side of the building and not visible from the public right-of-way. Does that make it any less historic?
No, that's where I was going to go next, is just the word location.
Yeah, I mean, according to this, it makes it immaterial if it's not visible from the public right-of-way.
Well,
right?
let's just get rid of from the
Right.
public right of way, and then we've solved
That's
it.
valid. That's valid.
Well, so we just say a change in
This does clearly seem to be related to
artwork.
signage.
Pardon?
It does clearly seem to be related to signage.
It
This,
does. But if we strike it from signage and make it more broadly interpreted, because it's a material change in appearance regardless of whether it's visible from the street. And if there's something, and use Crabapple as an example. If you're in the cottage, I don't know if it still is the small shop that was there. It was art and garden,
Right.
a variety of things. If there was artwork on the back side of Broadwell, the Broadwell building on that side, it was viewable by them. It's considered part of the building. I would think if they changed artwork, if it were there, it would be a material change in the building. I think it should be required to stay.
Well, let's make sure what we're talking about here. We're not talking about things being required to stay, right? Any of these things we're talking about in here, all this is doing is trying to set up the criteria for somebody to have to get approval before they change it. It doesn't mean it automatically stays.
Okay, I realize that.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying that. But to my point, it's under material change in appearance.
Right.
So that should include things like that.
Yeah, I mean, but what we want to be thinking about are anything that we want for somebody to have to ask for approval before they change it.
Yeah, well, we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is that in 4, by addressing it as advertising or the location of advertising is not inclusive enough.
I agree.
For me. I don't.
Mark has a comment. I agree.
Okay.
Or a question.
I don't know where to start. But I want to be so brief. On page 11, in the notification to the about the adoption of the ordinance, it does talk about art. So I think it's appropriate to put art in that point. It just says that, I'll just.
Where are you, Mark? I'm sorry, page 11?
Page 11, it's paragraph 7. I can't tell you what.
Okay.
It's just that in regards to notifying the owners and occupants of each designated historic property and the owners and occupants of each structure, site, or work of art located within a designated historic district shall be given written notification. So the art is discussed later in the ordinance, and I think that it's probably a good place to put artwork within that advertising, 5 cents worth. And ultimately, whether the artwork is appropriate, is historic or not, it meets the criteria, comes to the city council. So
Yeah.
I don't know if it's something you can
Yeah.
beat to death here all day, but.
Okay, I think Carrie was next. Curtis.
And this might be addressed with what you were just pointing out.
comes before you.
Pointing out. What you were just pointing out on page 11. But what if it's art we don't want? What if that? But what if the lady? I mean, just using that corner in Alpharetta. What if that lady wanted to paint on the side of her store? Dresses. 50% off and.
See,
Red and
I
white.
think that's my point. I think that's covered back up in the first paragraph. 'Cause to me, that if you added aesthetic, right? To me, that's
Yeah.
a change that
Yeah.
affects the aesthetic of that building. That
You
it
add
would have to be
aesthetics.
So
approved.
add aesthetics to J.
Well, that's what I was suggesting.
Okay. Because
Ugly building that's shaped like a chicken.
so let's add
You mean a
aesthetics.
Marriott?
Let's add aesthetics then.
Yep.
I think that's a great solution.
Okay.
I'll agree.
So a change that will affect either the affect either the exterior architectural, environmental, or maybe just put aesthetic there.
Right.
Environmental,
Comma.
aesthetic, or environmental features of a historic property or any building.
Exterior architectural, aesthetic, or environmental.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm not paying attention to him yet.
It's
Curtis?
sort of a dysfunctional.
I know. See, as time goes by.
Paul,
Do you-
then we drop.
To the committee, do y'all have,
Sorry.
are there any scenarios that y'all think would be appropriate for the owner of a historic property to modify the aesthetics or exterior of a building? Any,
Without approval.
without approval?
Say the question again.
Is there any scenario that in your collective mind would be allowed for a property owner to be allowed to change the aesthetics or appearance or anything on the exterior of a building without approval?
No. Now, the commission does not have the responsibility of selecting paint colors, but you have to, as I understand it, you have to ask for a certificate of approval.
Funny you should mention that because paint colors are specifically excluded in the model ordinance.
But they're included in the overlays.
Well, no,
At
they're
least in
included here.
Birmingham.
They're included here because they took that language out.
Oh.
In the model ordinance, it said except for paint
Yeah.
colors.
Yeah.
Here, paint colors are now a material change.
Well, I'm involved in a community that has it's Crested Butte, Colorado, and it has such highly restrictive historical building ordinances that you literally can't do anything, even if it's a repair of something dangerous. You literally have to request permission, and people just live with it. It seems crazy, but people just live with it. But their intention was you're not allowed to touch your building. You're not allowed to do anything to it. No painting, no signage, no nothing without approval. I was just trying to get a sense of your intent on that, or whether there was kind of a.
I think by virtue of the fact that they took out painting, whether it was by intention or not, that they meant it to be pretty darn all-inclusive.
Right. That's what it said. That's what it sounds
It
like.
wasn't our intention to select paint colors. Then we made a mistake in that regard. One of the first things we talked about in our first meeting was property rights and the agrarian nature of Milton. Agrarian nature makes property rights even a larger issue, and we didn't want to step on property rights. We wanted to be clear with that. That's why it's a voluntary system. So property rights is very important to this community.
So are you saying that you didn't want to
We
include?
did not want to select paint colors.
Okay, but right now the ordinance.
Right now, the way it's written, the commission will be selecting paint colors.
We did not.
Well, actually, if you look at the way Birmingham master plan was written, there is a
That master plan's got a whole set
So
of
does our Highway 9 overlay.
acceptable Pantone colors.
Colors, yeah.
Yep.
So I don't think you guys should necessarily be afraid of that, because there's a palette that could be considered that would not be in conflict with the agrarian nature of Milton.
You get into taste. I mean, if you ever go down to Grant Park and the paints that were required in 1989 are just not the paints you want today, and your taste change. And one of the issues we felt, if you didn't get into telling people what color they could paint their farmhouse, fewer people would want to have it, would want the designation.
But Mark, just for clarity, what I'm hearing you say, if I'm hearing you right, is not consistent with the way this is written.
It would be inconsistent with what we.
If your intent was that paint colors not be under the purview, then we would have to add that in here as an exclusion.
Not,
Yeah.
in our mind, the committee does not write this ordinance for the commission to have authority over paint color.
Okay.
Okay. All right, well, we'll get to that. But all right, so Fred, you had a comment?
Yeah, back, so you're going to take 4 out of that?
4 stays, like in my mind stays, but
And the word aesthetic will broaden that.
the word aesthetic
Okay.
in J in
Okay,
the definition, or not definition, but in the description resolves that, so that
I don't have
4
a
for
problem
its
with
intent can stay.
Do we want to strike visible from the public right away?
Yeah, and that's a good point, George. I think just the.
Are y'all okay with that being struck and broadening the restriction?
Okay, anybody else take any issue with that? And we strike everything after the word advertising?
Do you want to add the word removal as well as change? Or
Sure.
change the location? Change
Change
or
or
removal?
relocation.
Or change
change
in the
or
location
removal.
or removal, yeah.
That's good.
Anything else on page 1?
Okay, so just to
No, we're on
be-
page 3, Curtis.
To be clear on 4, a change in the location or removal of advertising, and it stops after that. Okay. Robin, did you get that?
Yeah, I did.
George, 5, you're still thinking you want to strike that?
Let me try and explain why. And again, I mean, I'm not trying to mix issues, but remember that the whole idea here is material changes are what triggers the need to get approval, right?
Right.
If you go back just for a moment to the certificate of appropriateness, which was on the prior page, and look at the definition, it's an application to make a material change, the defined term, in the appearance of a designated historic property or of a property located within a designated historic district. I don't have any problem with that for the historic property. My concern comes back to this idea, if we define districts to be geographical areas that may include historic properties, but are going to include things that are not historic properties, all of a sudden, if I want to do anything to those properties that are within that district that themselves are not historic, I've got to get approval to do it,
I think that's okay.
and I don't.
And I think it's okay because well, if, in the case of Milton, I recognize it's a little bit more of a challenge, but if you look at the historical application of that, I can certainly defend it. If in downtown Charleston, somebody wants to change a fence that is in the historic district, I would think that absolutely should be considered.
Agreed.
I think that's the intent here. But recognizing that we're going to put something on top of what is not currently designated as a historic district, and then hold those landowners that are then defined within a historic district accountable to that, I recognize there's a battle.
Well, let's use a hypothetical, and I apologize, I don't remember, I think you called it Webb. If we think about Webb as being a quote-unquote historic district, right, and you define that geographically based on what it was historically, which is, I'm assuming what we'd want to do, is define it the way Webb was once defined, right? Within that, there are existing buildings, right, that have nothing to do with historic value because they've been built basically on top of, right? All I'm saying is that my concern here is that this now controls what the people that own those buildings that have nothing to do with the history of that are going to be able to do with those buildings.
All-you-can-eat sushi place on the corner of Webb and Morris.
Well, but I'm, and again, for the sake of argument, to the other side of that, when you do establish the historic district, obviously it wouldn't be done without a careful consideration by the appropriate governing body over that. And it's to a certain extent putting a stake in the ground saying, from this point forward, anything that's here is here, and it has an appearance that has been assessed as appropriate to this area.
Yeah.
And then all it's saying is, if you want to make any changes after that designation as a historic district, it has to come under consideration. So that somebody who says, well, I wasn't a part of that, can do anything they want, that could pose a material change in appearance to what is intended to be now a general look and feel to that district, could be compromised. So that's why I would still stand tall to try to keep that in.
Yeah, and my counter-argument to that would be, again, not taking away from the possibility of creating a historic district. I would prefer to see the language of historic district taken out of here so that the trigger is only with respect to the historic properties, not to the district as a whole.
I subscribe to that. This is one of the things we thought we'd bump into with the district part, and we're bumping into it here. Mark, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just think y'all need to have a little more faith in the political process. The ultimate authority to designate a district lies with the city council. I don't think it would be pertinent that city council is going to have Walmart, for example, in a historic district. I think they would be a little more cognizant of what would make a district, and I don't know what that is outside of Crabapple, but it has to rely in the political process with the elected officials and city council. And they have to have the tool of a historical district, like every other, I believe, I can't say every other, but I think most historical ordinances have, in case maybe there is maybe a corner or, and I don't know if it would be.
Would you bet your life on that?
No. I think that you have to have enough faith in the political process.
I guess my concern along George's line, I mean, and I can use my own place as an example. I have a sign that's conforms to all the city requirements, and I want to change it to a gold color. Well, I've got to go before a commission and eventually go before city council to change a color on a sign that's already been approved by the city.
Well, technically, even if you want to repaint your building, right, if we put that back in there, technically, if you want to repaint your building, you got to get approval by the Historic Preservation Commission if you're within that district.
You have to get recommended by the commission and approved by council.
Yeah, sorry, I keep forgetting that, Mark.
But to me, it's just now two more layers of red tape.
Without a doubt, and we took that very seriously when we formed our committee.
It took me 9 months to get my sign in Roswell changed. It's essentially the same as it was, and I was replacing parts of it. We don't, that's an extreme example, but, I mean, you don't want to be in a situation where it becomes onerous and unworkable, and I know y'all aren't pitching something like that. But
So Curtis, in that example, where it took you 9 months in a historic district to get that change, did you find, although if you take the timeline off of that, did you find the
Well,
The
in
restrictions?
short, if I had known the secret handshakes, we could have gotten it done much faster, but I didn't have a lot of attention span, and I didn't know I wasn't familiar with their rules and the people and and so on and so forth. So for a layperson, but typically you do that once. You don't get the chance to become an expert at it. Who does it over and over again, And so I could have probably collapsed it into 2 or 3 months if I'd had for example, a current survey of the property. That would have cut a big amount of time on it. But there were some very specific requirements, and it was like the Wizard of Oz, the guy that opens up the door on the gate. He's not going to talk to you unless you ask for the right person. And it was very frustrating. And but still. It was okay. It was part of being in the historic district, but it was painful. And there's balance in there somewhere.
Mark?
That's part of being in a historic, either designated district or structure. It's, like you said, Savannah or Charleston, not much different than covenants in a subdivision where you're not allowed to have a wooden privacy fence. You have to, whatever the particular rules are for your property.
Well, I think you either want to be there or you don't want to be there. And if you don't want to be there, you should go do something else, And it's my take. And there's some pain that comes along with it. Some, let's say inconvenience. Pain's not the right word, but some inconvenience that comes along with it. But there are benefits that come along with it to offset that. So,
Savannah economically thrived because of it.
Yeah. Well, recognizing we have that we're not necessarily going to be able to come to agreement on every point in here. And, I would pose to the commission that we consider maybe just a hand vote on whether it stays in or goes out for the sake of expediency right now. Anybody?
it being
Number 5, for example. Just
Well, I mean, Paul, there's 2 ways to do it to me. I mean, one's to keep 5 in and take historic district out, and the other is to try and take 5 out. The bigger issue to me is the historic district inclusion, because it captures things that, to me, potentially captures things that I wouldn't want to have to be subject to this.
yeah, but
I don't mean take it out of the ordinance. I'm saying just
No,
take it out of
I
this
hear what you're saying,
clause.
but I would, to my point before, George, I would argue the opposite, because I think that there is value to it being in a district. Once you put a stake in the ground and say this is a historic district, that anybody in that area, whether
Well, but if that's your point of view, then 5 needs to stay in.
that's my point.
Okay.
So I mean, we're going to have to agree to disagree, and then we have to figure out how we move forward as a group. When we're going to bump into stuff like this. I mean, is a hand vote something that would be appropriate? I'm willing to entertain ways to get beyond that. And we'll
That's fine.
Let's do hand vote.
Want to do that? All right. All those in favor? Let's. I'll take George's lead on it. All those in favor of seeing 5 struck, please show your hands. 2.
Wait. I thought we were going to take out historic.
Yeah, if you're going to put it on me, I would prefer to see historic districts taken out of J.
Right, but I'm disagreeing with that. I think
I know that, but I'm saying striking 5 doesn't fix the problem, is what I'm saying. The question to me is whether to keep historic districts in J or not, right? And in the certificate, right?
Then you'd leave
Okay.
5 stays in. I don't care whether 5 stays in if you take historic districts out.
Okay. All right. Well, let's do it that way then.
How strongly do y'all feel about this notion of historic district?
I feel that ideally, had Crab Apple already been considered a historic district,
would I just be a historic property, or would I be a historic district? Or would we all be, would this be?
Like I said before, you've had way too much material change to reconsider any of it.
Individually, we're historic properties, but as a commission, we're a historic district.
If I go back to the plastic surgeon and say, show me the list of things that have been changed, you don't qualify. All right, so with this new argument about district
We'd be non-conforming.
in the larger description, let's make that assessment that way. Let's have a show of hands as to whether historic district should be struck from J, which would address it in its entirety. So all those in favor of striking historic district, please show your hands. 4? Okay, so it carries. It is struck. So, okay, to that end, we strike it in the description of J, starting with material change in appearance, change affecting the...
Seems like we're picking up momentum now.
Well, you can fix that in a minute, I'm sure. A landscape feature within historic.
Yeah.
I think it's only in 5, isn't it?
Well, no, and are we striking it in J in the description, and then...
No, it says 5.
And then 5...
Where it says
is the
or
only other-
district.
But help me with the wording on J, just as J.
Well, the or district needs to come out of 5.
But I
To be consistent.
I don't see district in the J part, just in the,
It's the very last...
I
line.
know J5, but not.
Now, the preamble.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So how should that read?
My hand was covering the historic district, sorry.
Or any building site, structure, site, object, or landscape features such as.
Yeah. So within a historic district should be deleted.
Yep.
And
And
J.
then,
Then I think it's only 5.
and then 5. So we just are striking the words or district. And in consideration of Curtis, do we want to change the word appertenant? Appertenant?
Pertinent.
I was just trying to play along. I didn't know what it meant. Okay. Any other questions on page 3?
We found where Milton Historic Preservation Commission is defined. It's at the bottom of page 3. Robin?
No,
Okay.
right after commission.
It was a little bit late, huh?
Yeah,
So in doing so, do we strike that here, or does it stay?
strike it here.
What's called a commission.
Yeah.
Can we stay with HPC just so we,
Yep.
can we change it?
Just have to do a
Commission
global
HPC?
replace, yeah.
But you've already defined it in A, section 2 on the first page.
Right,
So you want to strike this?
right.
Yeah.
But then throughout, she's going to have to replace commission with HPC. I know it's lifted from the ordinance, Robin, but what does section 3B mean?
That's where I was going to go next. I've got it circled. What's the purpose of that statement?
Other than it's created from an ordinance that's in the zoning ordinance. Sure. Yeah,
I mean, it doesn't say anything. I don't know that it adds anything.
adds value.
Do you guys have a recollection of why that was there in particular?
It's in the model ordinance.
Yeah. And As you guys defined it earlier with the role, as you saw by the appointment of the
Till we get to the bottom line.
mayor and council, I don't necessarily think that that has value.
Well, I agree with Rob's take that this is already part of the zoning ordinance, so it's.
Yeah. All right, so we can strike B.
Well, I mean, I think he's saying that he wants to keep it because it's a part of, I mean, this ordinance, isn't that what
As
you
part of the,
said?
as part of the,
I think we could remove it.
Oh, okay.
Already understood.
So move.
Yeah, anybody disagree with being removed? I think it's struck. Okay. Zooming on to page 4.
the new B.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Actually, it's the new A, because we've already defined,
Well, you're gonna still
You're
gonna
going to still have creation of
still
the
have A,
commission.
it's just you're not gonna say the definition.
all right.
There's hereby created a commission.
What was the committee's intent with respect to how the 7 members are appointed? I mean, what I'm asking is, because this is not very specific, are they just all appointed at large so that the,
Yeah, it says that in the last sentence.
no, I don't mean that. It says each appointee shall reside anywhere within the city and not be bound. I understand that. My question is, does each council member get to appoint one, or is it, because that's not, that doesn't say that here, if that's your intent.
Well, I think my belief when we first looked at that was council's going to do what council wants to do.
Well, they're going to do what they want to do unless it's defined here.
The intent for them not being bound was the potential that you could have.
Well, that's not what he said.
That's
Yeah,
not the
what
question.
George is saying is, you don't define it as each city council member and mayor has the right to get to put one person forward. You haven't defined that.
Yeah, there's
What
other.
it would
yeah.
suggest without defining that is that the mayor could appoint 3,
Right.
and one other council member could appoint 4, and it's done.
For each council person to have, nominate one, and then
Okay.
finally the council to approve it.
Okay.
Right, okay.
You're just trying not to restrict where they come from, yeah.
Not by
Okay, appointed by, so should it say appointed by the
Well, can
mayor
we-
and each
Can we
city
take a
council
step
member?
back before we go that far? I'd like to go back and pose my question to you guys that I brought up before is, do you guys feel that it is necessary to have a separate board for this purpose, and that these functions could not be performed by for the example, the Design Review Board, the DRB? And those guys are charged with very similar assessment of structures today. There's a whole series of ordinances that they abide by, and then this, theoretically, I'm just posing this as a hypothetical question. I'm not saying I have a feeling one way or the other about it, but you add this ordinance to their purview, and have we accomplished the same thing? The board is appointed the same way. If those members are carefully assessed by the mayor and council, and in their assessment of the individual, they ascertain that the individual's got a passion for historic preservation as well. Obviously, that's not necessarily a measure that was made of the current panel of DRB members, but it doesn't mean that they don't have that as well. So I'm just posing it as a question as to, do we need another board in addition to what we've got if the DRB could serve that purpose?
Can I just add?
Let's let Robin go first, and then
Oh, I'm
Travis,
sorry.
and let Carrie go second, and you go third.
Just as technicality, the council can do whatever they want, and that could be a possibility. So in the end, it's ultimately, I don't think that could, I think that's definitely could be a possibility if that's what they decide to do.
Okay.
Possibility
Of just using each of the DRB members as their assigned appointment and have it the DRB / HPC. I mean, there's nothing in here that precludes that from happening.
Okay.
I'm just throwing that out, that it's
Right.
not an impossibility.
All right. Well, sorry, let's hold that, or take that comment as it stands, and let Carrie go next.
I just want to add one point to that when I first saw this, I wondered if as a city we could come up with 7 volunteers that had very similar credentials, if you will, where a lot of the things that we ask for in the credentials for the DRB are similar to what is here. And, and if it wouldn't be a better use of the board's time to consolidate that, and the city's time as well, as far as staffing these kind of meetings and whatnot. But that's all I had to say.
Travis?
My feeling is that a Historic Preservation Commission could be made up and comprised of members of the community more focused and more knowledgeable in the historic aspects of the community, other than the design review. No offense to any qualifications they may presently have, but I think you have, just from sitting here, you have a past president of the Alpharetta Historical Society. Been in the area forever. I was a past board member of the Alpharetta Historical Society. I don't know that you currently have that
flavor
now on the design review board. It's possible. It certainly is possible.
Right.
Future design review boards. Also, though, if you look at some of the duties of a historic preservation commission, and not to say the design review board could not take it on, but historic preservation commissions would have to go in, not only create but maintain an inventory of historic structures or possible historic structures. So you would be just adding on duties to a design review board that could be easily handled by a historic preservation committee who's, I mean, how often would something need to be declared historic? I think you could go through in several years, 3 or 4 years' time, and pretty much wrap up anything that would be considered presently. And then it may be another 20 years before it's needed to come together to do that. So in that time, this board's function would just be, and I believe it's defined in there somewhere, teaching, giving knowledge, and maintaining such knowledge.
Okay. Curtis? Thanks, Travis.
Why do you all recommend that this should be the only board or commission in the city, at least that I'm aware of, that where the appointed members don't have to reside in the district of the appointer?
That was my personal opinion. I felt that being historic and being something where it could be that you're seeking members that do have knowledge, be it they've lived here their entire lives and they're older than anybody up there on the committee, that you wouldn't want to pass up the chance that there were 3 or 4 of those members living in the same district. And if that being what happened, you would be, at best, only be able to put 2 of those members on there.
I understand the logic.
Yeah,
I was just curious why you thought this should be the only one in the city that...
I wasn't aware that was the only one.
Yeah.
Curtis, for whatever it's worth, I think that thing's been softened in a lot of, in other cases as well, on other boards where they haven't adhered to that.
I personally think it makes sense. You want the best talent and the best personality fit and all that sort of thing.
I think it was that, along with, I'm sorry, I can't remember what Councilman Tart called it, but it was volunteer exhaustion. I mean, if you have exhausted, if you've only got 3 people in your district willing to volunteer to be on boards, and you've got 7 boards,
and you end up
with
UGA
more
grads
spots somehow.
in the second and third tier.
Yeah, I mean, I myself am on 2 boards, so.
So am I.
I mean, it starts that up.
You're actually on 3, Curtis.
I'm on 3. That's right. That's crazy. That's silly.
And I do the Milton Roundup. That's October 17th.
Well,
And one's only a committee.
okay.
It meets every Monday in the month of September, right?
Only till December.
It just sit me in the chair. You can go home now.
Yeah,
Curtis.
being a member and a contributing member are 2 entirely
That's,
different
I
things.
understand.
Is that what non-contributory
That's right. There
property
you go.
is?
See? We just found another definition for non-contributing. Yeah.
You're non-contributing.
I'm not. That's right. What's the non-contributing?
Is
Okay,
Curtis
so
our
I
voodoo
will-
doll tonight? We
For
keep
what?
on poking you. Are you our voodoo doll tonight?
If I ever got any respect, I wouldn't know what to do with it. So,
Rob and I would just, if we choose to leave this intact like it is, I don't hear any argument. That's so definitive.
I have.
We should
Just to backtrack on that, I think. I mean, unless there's some intent to use this as a groundbreaker for talent sourcing for future groups, maybe for any future group, then it seems to me we ought to take a step back and address the whole thing. If that's too complicated, and we just see if this flies. But Travis, in my opinion, I don't think, and I obviously am interested in historic preservation and historic structures and so on and so forth, but I don't think it's any more important to have the best talent you can get on the Historic Preservation Commission or versus the DRB or the BZA or the Planning Commission or anything else, and so it doesn't make business sense to me that we would just sort of let this fly when we know, and I believe it's the mayor directing it, when we know that the council's inclination is to, I thought, stick tight on the.
They actually asked me the same question. Council had actually asked me the exact same question. I gave pretty much the same answer, and then just got nodded and waited.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't want to make a big deal out of that. It's just, it's been an issue in a couple other cases, and I was curious.
Well, if you look at how often members of boards or commissions change, it typically only comes at the time of an election unless someone were to resign for some reason because of a conflict of personal obligation to the time or something. And as mayor and council assess each of us every day, not we're in their thoughts every day, literally, but as to whether or not we're a contributing member to their vision for the city, we all serve at their leisure. Can be removed at any time or replaced for better resource or whatever. And I guess I would just throw this back to them, suggesting that we have had this conversation where we recognize the value that a specific board can create because of the passion and the particulars of somebody defined with historic education or credentials could bring, but also offer to them the consideration that if it's not a historic preservation committee, that the design review board and the assessment of the members of that panel might also be considered for their credentials, that this would be added to future assessment of those members. So, Robin, in the interest of moving forward, I'm just going to ask, I'm sorry, you're on a mission to do something else, but I would just ask that our minutes or the comments made to the, if nobody objects, that in the presentation to the mayor and council, that it include the fact that we had a discussion about the benefit of the panel, separate and apart from the DRB, or I'm sorry, the commission, separate and apart from the DRB, or that those duties be inclusive of existing DRB.
So basically, it's the opinion of the planning commission that you would be in favor of the DRB having both hats? Or
No, I'm
majority
suggesting
of
that we had
a discussion about it.
A discussion on it, that we didn't draw a conclusion
Okay.
to it, but that we think it has merit to discussion at their level of one versus the other, and we ask that they give it careful consideration. Curtis?
Yeah, just for what it's worth, my opinion, I think this is not just about design, and maybe this is subjective, esoteric type stuff, but I think the historic preservation goes much deeper than the design characteristics of individual buildings. I mean, I agree with Travis. I think it makes a heck of a lot of sense to have vertical expertise there. Both sets of expertise would be fantastic, but you guys have to admit you're geeks. You're historic geeks, and that counts for a lot. So,
I just want to.
I agree with you.
Okay.
Yeah, I just think that there is some consideration that should be given to Curtis's earlier point about staffing, use of facilities, additional meetings, that if it could be accomplished within the confines of a DRB and it meets the expectations of mayor and council, that I think only in their minds at this point, being those who set us on this mission to assess this as a value to the city, that only in their minds, I think, they draw a conclusion as to which way it's best served. And I would just toss it to them. I recognize the value to both. I think if you can accomplish it with one, we may be better serve the city with some of the other considerations. But if there's expertise that they don't see today that we would get and do a disservice to the Historic Preservation Committee, I'm all for the creation of a Historic Preservation Committee. Okay? Anybody disagree with that? Okay, Robin, so if you would
Yeah,
make
I've
sure
got it
that's
written down.
included in the presentation to the mayor and council.
And do we want to correct after the new B, the first paragraph, the commission shall consist of 7 members appointed by the mayor and each council member?
Each appointed by,
Yeah. Yeah, after the word members, just insert the word each.
That's what I did. Each appointed?
Yep.
But each council member gets to appoint one, so
right,
you have to say,
each council member and the mayor gets to appoint one.
So how do you say that?
you could,
That's what I thought I said, but maybe I didn't. The commission shall consist of 7 members appointed by the mayor and each council member.
Should say it was 7 members with each council member and a mayor appointing 1 member.
Yeah.
Paul, and in that same paragraph, and we did agree that it's not to be bound to the council person's respective district.
Right.
Is that correct?
Correct.
We agreed to that?
Correct.
Okay.
Gentlemen, I don't remember, and I just flipped through to see if I could find it. I don't see anything in here that addresses the term of the member. If you look at the way ours is written and some of the others, it's to be served consistent with the term of the mayor or council. I mean, I'm Joe's appointee to the planning commission. I serve at his discretion, but my term is consistent with his term unless otherwise changed by him. Is there a value to putting in a term of service?
sort of says that at the last
Says
paragraph.
the last paragraph.
I was looking for that. I didn't see it. Which one, Joe?
The last paragraph under the new B, commission members and ex
Oh.
officio members shall serve terms as appointed by the mayor and city council.
Okay, I read right past that and didn't see it.
So-
Thank you.
But,
It's there.
but read the next part, and I want to know if that was put in by them, or is that from some other ordinance? Because we don't have it in ours.
Oh,
Yeah, I
it may be
think-
reimbursed for expenses?
Well, the first part of that's out of the model ordinance, that they shall not receive a salary. The second part of that's not.
I know, that's why.
Okay.
I thought it was an excellent idea, though.
All right, so nobody disagrees, and the term is stated, and we're okay with that. Thank you.
Profit center.
So to the next point that Fred or Joe brings up, both of you guys, about expenses.
Yeah, I think it's great.
Fred's not asking it to be changed. He's
No,
asking
I'm
me
just
to
saying, no, I'm
add-
just complimenting
Yeah.
them that we didn't have it in ours.
I don't take any
Maybe they
exception to
could,
that.
maybe they could reimburse us for our caffeine drinks.
Yeah, no.
Okay, nobody takes exception to that?
No.
I think it's
No.
great. All right, anything else on 4?
In the second paragraph, still under new B, it talks about the ex officio members may be appointed, but it doesn't say how or by whom.
And you don't think that carries from the first paragraph?
Yeah, but there's not enough to spread. How do you know who gets,
First
who
paragraph
gets the
only talks
extra
about
2
7.
people?
Oh, I see.
You could say the mayor and pro tem, maybe.
If it was me, I would recommend that it was the chair, the commission chair, building their own talent internally.
That's a good
Had y'all thought about that?
That's
It's a good idea.
a good point.
Yeah, what's their term?
I would assume the commission would know.
Good point. Then they have to be associated with a.
Yep.
I'd say the terms would be annual for those
Why don't we
guys.
just say 2 ex officio members may be added to the commission by the commissions?
And then Joe points out that they would
Or can we
not
say,
have a term.
Can we say?
As I would
to-
say, annual term, rather than associated with a.
Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds good.
Well, can we say that they can be added by the commission, subject to the approval of mayor and council?
No, it just adds a lot of time.
Okay.
Just
But
leave it
I
out.
agree with Joe, it's saved on an annual basis.
Because it says they're non-voting, doesn't it?
Right.
Yep.
Can they just stay there as long as they want to stay there until they
No,
get
that's what we're
tired
just
of
saying,
it?
Robin, that is limited
Yeah,
to
well, I think
one year, but can be renewed by the,
Yeah, if it comes up for renewal at a year, then if they're not working out, it's not awkward.
yeah.
1 year.
I was trying to think for consistent.
No, I'm just saying, if the commission did nominate somebody and they didn't want them there anymore, you don't want to.
Yeah, then it won't be awkward.
Yeah, you put in that it's a 1-year term unless renewed by the commission.
Be like, oh, time to go.
Well, renewable.
Yeah, darn,
Why
that
don't- why don't-
One-year term.
that 1-year thing is.
Why don't we say, in addition, 2 ex officio members may be appointed by and serve at the discretion of the commission?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then they can terminate if they,
Right.
yeah.
And serve at the discretion of the commission.
Yeah.
Where are you adding in the
Right in the first line.
Well, you
Maybe
really
really
don't-
appointed.
You really don't need to add the 1 year. You
Since
can,
it's about
if it's at their discretion, then they can
Yeah.
decide whether they want to keep them on or not.
But then we like the year thing.
Sorry?
They like the year thing.
That
'cause
just
then
seemed cleaner
Had a good
than-
exit point.
Yeah.
How would you feel about the at the discretion and leave the 1 year?
Gets awkward again.
Yeah.
Certainly leaves it open.
They could be there a month.
I mean, the reason for the 2 ex officio members that would be non-voting would be so that you have
We get it.
a resource on the committee that doesn't live in Milton.
We get, well,
The history of Alf Road is
expertise.
the history of this area.
What's the concern about saying that they serve at the discretion versus putting in a 1-year term?
I'm okay with that. I just think it,
They're just saying if there's.
You
if
want to
there's
be
a
able to
definitive
terminate if it's a
timeline.
problem. That's where
You
discretion
could
helps.
use that
And,
to take somebody out.
But if it's at their discretion, all you need is a vote to take them out.
But would you at least have it a year?
yes, but if
benchmark?
there's a problem before the year's up, you want to be able to terminate.
That's all.
So.
You do. You may not know it,
Say
but
they
you do.
serve- Say they serve
Yeah,
the
I mean,
discretion
that's
of the commission, but have to
power
vote
you want to,
to-
authority.
Each year or something
strong,
like that.
valid reason for doing so.
Okay.
I wouldn't want somebody to have a vague reason for doing so. I don't like that personality.
Well,
Commission's going to decide, not just one person.
Good thing I didn't read the entire opening thing about cell phones.
Is that one of your 8 girlfriends? you
Come on,
said?
guys, let's go.
So George is suggesting, and I think there's some merit, that we say shall be appointed by and serve at the discretion of the commission for a term to be renewed annually, or for, what do you say, a roll to be renewed annually?
annual terms. I mean, I don't say
And that way it still
renewed-
gives you the
renewed annually
benchmark of
suggested.
a year. You serve at the discretion of, but not to exceed a year unless otherwise appointed or reappointed.
I kind of see back to Jennifer's point that maybe we don't want that limited to that
Okay?
1-year term, for the reason being that maybe we want to have somebody on the commission for a short period of time to help us with research on a particular building, or help the commission.
Okay. I don't.
And you could just tell them, hey, this is our purpose of wanting you to be on it, and at the end of the 6 months or however long it takes to do that project, we'll need somebody else after that.
Travis, let's peel this back a little bit. If these ex officio members don't have any voting rights, they don't hold any office, they don't have to be counted for the purpose of determining a quorum, and they can be outside of the city, why do they even have to be defined?
I guess you're right.
I
guess they.
There's nothing that precludes the commission from going out and asking for a volunteer resource to help. You could ask for 15 of them if you wanted to.
That's true. Yeah. Why don't we strike the entire paragraph?
I could go either way.
I think it gives you more flexibility if it's not there.
I've found some value, and I would think that people interested in historic structures get some value out of being associated with other groups of like-minded people, and ex officio status, even though it's non-voting, seems to have some kind of appeal to some people who you might want to make an official member of the team, even though it's kind of a junior membership.
I think you're right.
I agree with that.
It might be
But then let's not
That's right, and it's an easy thing to give for respect, and
But let's not put restrictions on it
On
then.
the
I mean, let's just say
number.
that
Take
they
out
can
the
appoint
number
ex
two.
officio members, period, at their discretion.
At the chairman's discretion.
Okay.
All right, so do we accomplish that by adding the words after they may be appointed, after the word appointed, by and serve at the discretion of the commission, and then we're done? Or do you guys, are you suggesting we strike more of that paragraph?
If you're gonna have them as being ex officio and make them that official, then you're gonna have to define, I think,
Yeah,
that they don't have to own property, they don't have to be residents, you gotta keep all that
I
in
think the
there.
rest has to stay. Okay,
Yeah.
so we accomplished it by simply adding those
Yeah.
by and serve at the discretion of the
Right.
commission.
I'm striking two
Striking the word "to."
in the number.
Okay, everybody's good with that? All right, anything else on that page? Okay, blasting our way on to page 5.
it's a sonic boom or something.
Something like that.
I don't have anything to page 6.
You don't?
Somebody's read the ordinance before.
I had
No,
something on page 13.
I have something on page 5. I didn't understand the
I mean,
word.
not on page 13, on number 13.
Understand the word promote in number 7. Can you guys help me understand that? The use of the word promote on number 7,
On page 5.
Encourage.
page 5.
That's what- Encourage the acquisition by City of Milton.
I just didn't understand why that's a proactive word.
What's facade? What's facade?
I didn't understand the intent of that.
Well, I think it's intended to be proactive. It's
So it's saying they're authorized to do this and to promote the acquisition?
Yeah, but they're trying, they got to be proactive in order to try and get the council to try and seek facade easements or conservation easements.
Okay. I just, promote, when I read it, struck me as just as inconsistent, but I didn't understand why that word.
What do you,
What did Carrie say? Well, where did you say, Carrie?
encourage? Which means the same
I
thing.
think-
Yeah, I was nitpicking when I read that, but I just,
I'm
for no
Encourage.
reason at the time,
I
it
like
struck me funny.
encourage. It sounds less.
All right, anybody take any offense to the word encourage?
No.
Okay, Robin, can we change that,
Yeah.
please?
just glad I could help.
Well, you finally made it.
Always adding
Finally.
value.
Are you okay with seek in number 10? That's kind of proactive.
Now you're splitting hairs.
I don't like seek out grammatically. I would seek local state.
If they don't seek it, nobody's going to come and say,
I'm
hey,
just
do you want some
making
funds?
Drop out.
Can we strike the word out and still accomplish the same thing grammatically?
That's fine. I have another committee that hates the
Don't give us
Past.
anything to hate.
Then what?
I mean, that like,
Doesn't like
they
using
don't like
past
past
tense.
tense.
Oh.
Oh, yes.
Well, that's important.
Okay. Okay. Nothing else on, wow. Are we done
Well,
with
no,
5?
I had 13.
Oh.
Commission shall not obligate the city.
It's not worded very well, but it basically says that they can't do anything without the prior consent of the council.
It's saying that they can receive all this stuff.
Yeah, but they can't acquire or sell, they can't make anything that obligates the city.
Is the intention here that a 501c3 might be formed to be the recipient of the funds and manage the funds, or is that going too far? I can't. It seems to me that's what's behind some.
I don't
of this,
think the
but-
commission itself would qualify as a 501c3.
No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't. But collecting funds on behalf of the city I'm not sure how
Well, maybe,
much sense that makes, if it's dedicated to historic.
So
Yeah.
I guess the part I'm struggling with is the commission shall be authorized, I mean, if you put that in front of this number 13, the commission shall be authorized to, I mean, I understand it shall be authorized to receive donations, grants, funds, gifts of historic property, and acquire and sell historic properties. Like,
how or why would they have the reason to sell?
sell it. That's the part I'm struggling with.
They could sell it to a preservation group.
But do we want the commission to do that? Because it doesn't, it then says it shall not obligate the city to any receipt. Well, it
Or
does say or
transaction.
transaction, so that covers, they wouldn't be doing it without
Right.
the prior consent. Okay. The first time when I read that before, I was thinking that they were,
As I say, it's not worded very well, but
yeah.
it's there.
Okay, so for what it's saying is in order for them to receive a donation, a grant, a fund, or a gift of historic property, acquire or sell historic properties, it has to be with the prior consent of the Milton City Council.
Right.
Yeah, that part's way late in the,
Would it be better if that last sentence came after the first sentence?
You could start the whole paragraph by saying, subject to city council approval, or provided
Subject
the
to-
city council has prior approval. Just move it to the front.
Yeah.
That work?
you could say, yeah, or does it change it materially if
Commission
you
shall
say
be
the commission
authorized
shall
to-
seek prior consent of the Milton City Council to, and then go to the
No,
list,
Not seek, shall obtain.
shall obtain prior consent to the Milton City Council in order to, and then go to the.
Yeah.
Okay, Robin, did you get that?
No,
Not
just
really.
hang on one second. The section starts out by saying, "The commission shall be authorized to." And you don't want to start 13 by saying,
No, you're right. The
All
language
right.
won't
again,
work.
the commission.
You're right.
All right.
I would just, at the end of that sentence, Paul, I would just say, there, to Joe's point, they're authorized to receive, blah, 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 acquire and sell historic properties, comma, provided that the city council has granted prior approval to do so.
I'm sorry, George, give it to me one more time.
Change the period after acquire and sell historic properties to a comma,
Okay.
and just add, provided the city council has provided prior approval or prior consent to do so.
Yeah.
And then you can take the last sentence out.
I thought it has given consent.
Well, isn't the last sentence making an additional statement, George, though? We're saying in order to do the actions above, that it requires prior consent of the mayor and council.
Right.
It's just late.
But all
You're
those
just being
things are not
redundant.
necessarily addressing, I guess, are we saying that all those things inclusive are the receipt or transaction? Is that what we're saying? Is it that those items, are those the things being defined by receipt or transaction in that next statement?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it can be struck then?
Yes.
Okay, all right, I understand.
So
Okay.
you're saying to strike the last sentence?
Strike the last sentence, but before we do that, we have to insert after the word properties in line 2.
Right, provided the city council has provided prior consent to do so?
Correct. And then donations, grants, funds, or gifts shall be accepted only if such acceptance does not violate the City of Milton Code of Ethics, and that's where it ends. Everything after that is struck.
I don't want to jump ahead, but while we're here, given those changes, I don't understand the need for G on the next page.
Are we ready to leave 5?
No, I'm not leaving 5. It's just if you look at G, it's exactly the same thing. I don't see that G adds anything.
Or you mean the new app?
Well,
Sorry?
It just talks about funds. It doesn't talk about historic properties on G.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, it's the new F, but yeah, the old G. Because I went ahead and changed everything when we removed that
On
other.
where it says commission's authority to receive funding from various sources, where the other one talks about historic properties.
Yeah, but read the text, Carrie.
The commission shall have the authority to accept donations and shall ensure that these funds do not displace appropriate governmental funds.
The only thing that's additive there is the displacement of government funds, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we want to keep G, it just sort of say that the commission shall ensure that donations don't displace appropriated governmental funds.
What is the purpose of G?
Well, what G is saying is if there's a
Grant or
just
something?
offer a grant that you can get from a federal, that the acceptance of funds should not disqualify that
Right.
grant.
And I'm okay with that. What I'm saying is that the authority to accept donations and the donations being consistent with the Milton Code of Ethics is redundant. We just got through saying that.
Oh, I see. So we can strike G.
Well, I think
But you still
the
want
only
to
thing
keep
of
that.
value in G is saying that the commission has to ensure that donated funds don't displace appropriate governmental funds.
So maybe add that to 13.
Yeah, we could add that to 13
That'd be better.
And then strike G.
and strike G. Just
Really
add that.
F.
Just add at the end of. I'm sorry. Add that at the end of 13 and then strike F. New F.
Sorry.
Well, hang on, just to make sure we're not losing something here.
What's the? Oh,
If you go,
it won't hurt anything to leave it both places, will it?
well, if it's under,
If it's
what we're saying is
overstated.
in E, that they have the ability to adopt rules and standards separate and apart from the ordinance. And so it's giving them some decision-making authority in their own right. So what it's saying here is that they can't adopt anything that has to do with funds that would compromise what we've already said. I don't think it hurts to restate it there. Because it's saying you can't adopt your own set of rules that would preempt stuff that was,
No, it says they can.
You lost me. I don't know where you're going.
Because it starts a new topic. I think that's what he's saying.
yeah, E, which is the new topic, is Commission's power to adopt rules and standards.
What does that have to do with G?
That it has the ability to create rules of its own. And I'm saying that in the rules that it might create, they can't create a new rule that would preempt the ability to not follow
So
the
maybe-
mayor and council's direction on funding grants, gifts, historic, et cetera.
Okay, you've lost me.
Yeah,
Well, I think, okay.
I didn't get that either.
Maybe we could just, it is something different from the other number.
I'll withdraw it. Just leave it the way it is. I mean, it's redundant, but it doesn't hurt anything, I guess, to be
Yeah,
redundant. So
that's
just
what,
leave it.
that's,
I'm getting.
Just leave it, strike out.
Language from the Georgia model.
Rodman?
Just leave it, but take out the last sentence.
Right. Right. That's not in the ordinance.
Wait, you said that in
The
reference to
code of
13,
ethics.
Joe? Where are you saying that in reference to?
In
looking
G,
at G.
he's saying take out donations shall be accepted only if acceptance doesn't violate the City of Milton Code of Ethics. That's already in
I
13.
think he's trying to be funny.
No, he wasn't.
No,
Oh, you're
serious.
not. Oh,
That-
okay.
It's already in 13.
It's already in 13 and it's not in the model
Oh,
ordinance.
okay.
Okay, I'm okay with that. Anybody else take
That's fine.
any? All right,
But leave everything else the same.
yeah. Okay, so we're still on page 5. Have we finished page 5?
I don't have anything on 5.
Anybody else? Okay.
I have
Stepping rapidly into page 6.
I have a suggestion for E, which I think everybody had a concern about.
Yeah.
I'm okay with E with two changes. One, on the third line, I would cross out "and design guidelines and criteria." And the reason for that, I think that the commission should have the ability to adopt rules and standards for the transaction of business consideration. I mean, those are procedural things, like we have the right to modify our own rules, bylaws, right? I just don't think that we want them to have the right to do design guidelines and criteria.
You think that should be ordinance change?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I would,
So just-
and the second change I would make is in the last sentence, I would say all rules shall be approved by the Milton City Council before going into use.
Did you get the typo on standards? First sentence, Robin.
No, okay.
Okay,
And then
so
we want to go ahead and delete design guidelines and criteria, or just design guidelines?
I would take that whole thing out. I would put a period after bylaws.
Okay.
And I would also add the word such.
Yeah,
under
such
second-
rules and
such,
standards.
Yeah.
Yep, good add.
where are you? You guys lost me.
The commission's.
Shall
Such.
adopt
Such
rules and,
Such rules and standards.
Must be a Tony thing.
okay, for the transaction of business and for the consideration of applications for designations and certificates of appropriateness, such as bylaws,
Right,
period.
right. The
Everything-
commission have the flexibility to adopt
Such.
such rules.
Referencing the first sentence.
Right, without amendment to this ordinance.
Okay. The rest of that stays the same until the last line, which says, all rules shall be approved by the Milton City Council before going into use. Okay? Anything else on that? Okay. Moving further down, we've already addressed G. Anything other than that?
Yeah, in section 4, we've created a new term called historic business districts. The word business, I think, should be stricken in A, two places in A. Unless there was an intent of historic business districts being something different.
Our intent is not to have it. You're on section 4.
Was your intent that there be no historic business district, period, or was the intent that there would initially be no historic districts designated?
Were you making a distinction between business and just historic districts?
I think our intention, Travis helping, was not to have any terminology, not to use the term historic business district.
Okay.
Or
Okay, so we can strike that? We
So-
can strike the business?
Yeah, I think you
Well-
can take the word business out. I mean, I think all that's saying is this body, the committee that formed this ordinance, is not going to define a historic district.
I don't think you need to say that.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I'm guessing.
I mean, I don't think you need to say that at all.
My guess is it was probably in Georgia, I know it's redundant, and we didn't want it, and we just noted we didn't want it, so it's striking.
Whack it.
What, the whole section?
Well, yeah, does the whole thing go away?
No, I agree, it does read kind of funny, because, I mean, we've already sat there and defined what the commission's power would be, so I think this is saying that the historic district would not be established along with this, the approval of this ordinance.
Do we define business district?
Pardon?
Just looking if we have a definition for historic business district. We don't.
Well, this is the first time we introduced business district, as I recall.
Right.
Right, so we just struck it.
Yeah, but how do you, section?
Because then the next one is designation of a historic district.
I
So
don't
that's-
think you need A at all. I would
Yeah.
take out A
Yeah.
altogether.
Whack it.
Yeah.
And it's
Let's
not
just
in-
get rid
it's
of
not
A.
in the ordinance.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
on
lots of
ordinance.
things they don't want to do, and we're not going to.
So we should get rid of A and then,
A is struck. And then is it a southern thing where it's preliminary?
No, it's,
it's just the Word document, okay. I have a
Robin,
question.
can you change that ampersand in the title to the word A and D?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
Recommendation and designation.
yep. I was just thinking about that guidelines, back what we talked about being in the zoning ordinance.
Sorry?
I want to kind of go backwards a little bit, back to under
far back?
commission's power to adopt rules and standards.
She's just going up.
When
Where are you?
I'm still on the same page, 6, back to
Yeah.
commission power, the old E, new
Yeah.
D.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to, I'm not necessarily disagreeing, but I just kind of want to do some more research about whether the guidelines, I know like our normal guidelines are not a part of the ordinance. So I just want to at first I was like, yeah, because I was thinking more like overlay district.
Well, they don't have to be
Standards.
they don't have to be part of the ordinance. By striking that, you're not making it part of the ordinance. All you're saying is that they don't have the ability to change those without going through a formal process.
Okay.
If it's silent to it, I don't think it gives them the authority. By striking it, we've accomplished that.
It's not, the intent of striking is not to make the guidelines part of the ordinance.
Okay. Okay, I was just making sure, because I was the one who made a comment about it, so.
All right, and just as a point of record, we need to change the rest of the letters on this page. So that was D. The F is now E. G is now F. H is now G. Then we come to section 4. We eliminated A, so B becomes the new A, and we're fixing the preliminary. Anything else on that page, or can we?
Page 7.
Okay.
I don't know how we're going to resolve this tonight. I mean, my concern, not to be repetitive, but it's both with respect to section C here and section D on the next page, is that this is where, to me, the criteria for establishing historic districts and historic properties needs to be articulated. And particularly given the fact that both of these are written by saying that they only have to satisfy at least one of these criteria, and when the first one doesn't say much of anything, that to me just leaves it far too open-ended.
Yeah, Robin, in the stuff that you sent us today, one of the things I did zip through looking for was to see if there were any examples of more definitive guidelines, and I didn't see any. But
There was,
obviously I didn't have time to research more besides what you just forwarded. So I was clicking through those links.
I think the Raleigh one, that was just an excerpt from their guidelines.
Yeah,
I
but-
did open that up, so.
The one that I said I couldn't open.
No, it wasn't that one, it was another one within
Okay.
those, but
I didn't
it was
see
from the
any.
federal, it was actually,
We're 30% done.
yeah. I mean, I haven't looked at it closely either about the guidelines, that's why I was asking George about that. But I do think that the guidelines are the responsibility of the HPC, so,
Yeah, but I think an example, or not necessarily, well, let me say it. I'll say it, then we can discuss it, because it may have a bunch of holes in it, is I think it would be appropriate to include as an example, either as an attachment or an addendum or whatever, to this, a list of guidelines that either are the representative or the guidelines. Not that they have to be generated by us tonight necessarily, but clearly they're not going to be. But I'd like to see us get to that point so somebody who's reading the ordinance would understand some of, if not all of, the guidelines that they are going to consider.
well, and maybe the committee could address it more specifically, but I think that's a totally different, I mean, even though it talks about the guidelines in the ordinance, I don't think that's our responsibility right now. Your responsibility. I mean, I think I know what you're saying, is it'd be nice to see, well, what does a set of guidelines look like? But then I don't think that that's the,
Well,
that's up to
At some point, it
another.
needs to be defined, because whether it's by us asking for it now, of a panel that's been unfortunately dissolved officially by the mayor and council, right? You guys have already hit your term, but could be recreated for the purpose of someone's
Well,
additional
technically,
ordinance to get done.
they're created till the end of the year, but
Okay, so to not at some point get to a list of guidelines, I think is a mistake. Whether it's for our assessment or the mayor and council's assessment, to just suggest that there's going to be at some point guidelines, I think is a mistake not to.
I'll be honest with you, personally, there's 4 criteria there. I mean, if we're not going to do anything with that in terms of creating anything, the only way I'd be comfortable with it is if we took A out. Because A to me is the one that's the open-ended, vague. B, C, and D to me have some substance to them. As an example, let me, and I know this is an obtuse example, but if I look at A, I could argue or make an argument that the Deerfield complex that we're in is an outstanding example of a structure that represents the 1990s when the building was built, right? And it satisfies that A criteria. It doesn't make it historic, but it satisfies that criteria.
I think we're talking about, I'm confused about guidelines, but you're talking about the criteria for proposed designation,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Okay, but you're talking about,
I'm not talking
are you
about
talking about guidelines for this, or you're talking about the guidelines that are talked about
No,
being
we're talking
created?
about guidelines for this, for
Okay, I'm
determining whether
sorry.
something is historic or not design guidelines.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm fine, I'm sorry. I reel back in my comments, sorry.
Are you using the word guidelines or criteria?
That's what was getting confusing, so.
Starts out saying criteria.
Right.
And you were talking about guidelines, so my head went somewhere else, so.
Sorry.
I think the state used this language, state language is broad on purpose. You know, you want something more definitive. I think they were broad on purpose in order that maybe there was a special property that the elected bodies could include as historical. The language here is almost exactly out of the state language, almost verbatim. I think there's a reason.
Have you guys, in your research, seen anything that was more definitive in any of the examples from any other cities' ordinances, or?
I think that first statement on there, it's outstanding example of structures representative of its area, is purposely vague just because of the different movements we've seen. You know, when you talk about a Victorian house, you're not talking about the age of the house, or
Right.
sorry, the style of the house, you're talking about the era in which it was built. At the same time, what if we went through 10 years from now where everybody built round houses? 50 years from now, there's only one round house left, then it becomes an outstanding example of.
But 50 years from now,
representative of its
50
area.
years from now it qualifies under B.
I think you almost have to make B a mandatory, more mandatory qualification and then A.
I printed out a number of different ordinances from different cities, and I just have a couple of them here, and they're quite general. This one is from the Washington State Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. This is their model ordinance, and it says, significant used in the context of historic significance means the following. A property with local, state, or national significance is one which helps the understanding of the history or prehistory of the local area, state, or nation by illuminating the local, statewide, or national impact of the events or persons associated with the property, or its architectural type or style in information potential.
That sounds pretty definitive, Bob. I said, that sounds pretty definitive. That to me is more measurable than A.
Yeah, that's an example of where I'd like to see us go. But I don't know if it's a list of 2 or if it's a list of 8 of those kinds of things. Because I don't have the expertise that you guys do. When I just look at it and read it as we've got it today, it strikes me as too broad brushstroke, where it doesn't give you guys the kind of authority you probably are seeking, where it does require some more definitive descriptions.
Well,
like that.
Here's another one, if you wish, I can read it, it's a little bit longer, but it's
Sure.
quite similar to the Georgia one. This is from Florida, a city in Florida. A historic structure, historic site, a historic district designation may be placed on any site, natural or improved, including any building, improvement, or structure located thereon, or any area of particular historic, architectural, archaeological, or cultural significance to the city, which exemplify or reflect the broad cultural, political, economic, and social history of the nation, state, or community, or identify with historic personages or important events, embody the distinguishing characteristics of an architectural type, then there's more words, are representative of the notable work of a master builder, designer, or architect, have yielded or may likely yield information important to prehistory or history.
See, that's what it's longer, but that's exactly what I'm talking about, that I'd like to see. But
I think you could actually, consideration of what I feel right now, if you can debate is historic or not in the city of Milton, I think you could remove A and everything that I can think of would still fit under B, C, or D.
Suppose you were to say this. The historic district is deemed worthy of preservation by reason of value to the nation, the state of Georgia, or the city of Milton for the following reasons. A, it is an outstanding example of structures representative of its era, and B, it contains a few remaining examples of a past architectural style or type over 50 years old, or, and then leave the rest the way it is. So you've got A plus
That works.
one of those three.
yeah, I like that.
But can you still say at least one of the following?
No, you
No.
strike
Oh,
out.
okay, you struck that, okay.
So it says, or the city.
The or takes care of that. It's got to be A and B, or C
Right.
or D.
Right.
Sounds like
Okay.
variance considerations.
Same one?
Yeah,
Sounds like variance consideration.
but it makes sense though.
Okay, so Joe, can you give that to us again? You're reading under C right now?
Reading under C, in that last sentence in the paragraph.
Which is now.
Now B.
Right.
Historic district is deemed worthy of the preservation by reason of value to the nation, the state of Georgia, or the city of Milton for the following reasons. Strike out the words at least one of. And then A, it is an outstanding example of the structures representative of its era, and it can then B, contains the few remaining examples of a past architectural style or type over 50 years old, or, add the word or, and the rest stays the same.
Yep. And then do the same thing in D. Or do C,
New
sorry.
C. Yeah,
That's good.
I like
You mean
that.
the new C, you mean? Okay.
Everybody okay with that?
Yep.
So let me just make sure I get this right. It's, after A is an and, it is an outstanding example of structures representative of its era, and B, it contains a few remaining examples of a past architectural style or type over 50 years old, or
Right.
it is blah, blah, blah. And then-
Did you get the striking in at least one of?
Yeah, I did. I'm just trying to clarify the ands and ors.
Yeah.
And then C, it stays in or,
Correct.
and then it ends with a period with D.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So you do that for the new B, and you do that for the new C.
Travis, and not to put you on the spot, but what is the purpose of designating properties as contributing or non-contributing? Because I didn't find any differentiation later in the ordinance with respect to how those are treated.
I guess to fall back on our crabapple example, once again would be, the gas station would be, if crabapple itself, if you define it within 500 feet of the center of that intersection, you
Sure.
said, this structure is historic, it's contributing. This is a gas station, it's non-contributing.
Okay, I understand what the meaning is, but so what do you do with that after you've designated in that way? What does that mean with respect to how those two properties are treated going forward?
I guess going back to the discussion a little bit earlier, it'd be need to be defined a little bit better.
I understand. Okay, so I own the gas station and I'm non-contributing, and Paul owns the Eddie, not Eddie's, Eddie West, which is contributing. How are our respective properties going to be treated differently under this ordinance, for example, if we want to make a material change? I didn't find anywhere where they were treated differently after they were designated. I'm just questioning what's the purpose of the designation.
Or I'm just guessing, does the fact that we are describing a non-contributing building within that offer up us as eligible for grants or funds or otherwise that might not have been otherwise been considered if we had included a structure like the gas station without identifying it as non-conforming?
I would state that
Just guessing.
in discussion during our committee that a contributing structure, any material change in that would have to get a certificate of appropriateness from the historic commission. A non-contributing structure would have to get it from a board other than.
I thought we,
Right, I'm just saying that was the discussion we had in committee at that time, prior to the changes made earlier tonight.
Either we need to, or we already have, changed everything to say even a non-conforming building, non-contributing building should have to have any changes considered.
No, we took that out by striking historic districts out of that criteria.
Well, we didn't strike districts that, though.
Yes, we did. We voted 4-3 to strike
Only
it.
thing we voted on. That's because he didn't get his way.
No, we left it in.
I'm just kidding. No, on page 3.
In the definition of material change in appearance, we struck within the historic district.
I didn't like that. So I'm still thinking.
He's in denial.
I'm kidding.
But no, this brings up a good point. I want to revote. No,
Yeah. Want to vote again?
Well, Paul, wouldn't have been the first time.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
We're due for a revote, aren't we?
Okay.
What do they call that?
Rescission.
Yes, yeah, let's have a rescission vote.
Don't forget, you're on camera.
That's right, we're on Granicus, we can't have a rescission vote.
Sorry.
I said, we're on Granicus, we can't have a rescission vote. Because there's no criteria for when, there's no criteria for when you can have a rescission vote.
Because that wasn't the vote that was following Robert's Rules of Order, so it wouldn't necessarily have to be a rescission vote.
Right.
Are we on break?
We need to figure out,
Yeah, what do
what are we going to do here? We got to figure out how much longer we're going to do this.
Yeah, I think we need to
The Granicus is going to blow up in about 10 minutes. No.
well, and although I will tell you, if I look deeper into this, I don't have a whole lot of changes until we get into like page 16. After
Oh,
this.
yeah, but we still haven't dealt with the,
Another big
yeah.
The big issue.
Special call.
Does anybody else have?
Joe, you've read this pretty carefully too. Did you see any use for those terms later on?
Before we do that, does anybody else have any significant changes after this?
Depends on how you define significant.
Well, any changes? Let me just say it that way. Any
I do.
changes?
I have some questions.
I want to, get more concrete
I've got stuff
designation.
through page 10.
Do you want
And
to,
after page 10, I have nothing until page 16.
I've got 11. So
I've got 12.
I've got 13.
So, I guess
All right,
I did.
okay.
We're not bidding, Robin.
Good try,
You just
Paul.
added that on.
Good, Paul. Good try.
Yeah, shoot.
Sorry.
And then
All right, so
Joe had the
before we continue, then let's
appeals
figure out a timeline for where we're going to get to tonight.
Yeah, we're not going to get through it.
I would suggest we finish,
Section 4.
is that what it is? Is it section 4?
That goes to about mid-page 12.
Okay.
I didn't eat dinner, George.
I didn't either.
Me either.
I neither.
Well, Sarah's been growling.
I'm growling away.
I know, I heard it is, maybe it was yours and it was yours.
Okay, so let's agree to finish section 4, but I think we need to spend at least a couple minutes talking about
Yeah, I agree.
Biggie. Anybody disagree with that?
Would you say it again?
We're going to pound our way through the rest of section 4, which takes us to the top of page 12. And then we also need to reserve some time to discuss the prior use. And then we call it a night. And then we'll have to agree to some additional discussion time so we can accommodate the timeline set forth by the council, which puts it on their work session for October 12th.
Yep.
So that's 3 weeks from now. Okay.
Backing up from there, excuse me for speaking without raising my hand. Backing up from there, I assume this is going to have to go through legal after we finish with it. So what's realistic for that? A week? No less.
You mean a week to go through legal before the 12th? I don't know.
Yeah, what I don't want to do, if we can at all avoid it, is put these guys in a spot where this thing gets delayed again.
Well, we got to just schedule another
Means we have
special
about
call meeting.
As quickly as possible to allow enough time for legal review.
Yeah.
Or and anything,
Which
any
probably
other
means next
administrative.
week.
Pardon?
It means we really need to find some time next week.
I'm in town. I can do it.
Okay.
Anyway, we'll schedule that.
You're gone next week.
I'm leaving Sunday. But that's
Those
okay.
retired guys have so much vacation.
I didn't say it was vacation. This happens to be income producing.
Well, shoot, we don't get away with that.
But that, I mean,
Yeah, but a fishing.
No.
a
All right,
fishing
let's move on. So-
tournament doesn't qualify.
right.
How about special call meeting on Saturday before Fred leaves?
Before the what?
Before
Or
Fred leaves.
Oh.
What are we going to do with C3 or old new B3?
hang on, B3.
Well, it's new B3. It's old C3. It's the top of page 8.
All right.
I don't. I mean, if you want to leave it, leave it. I don't.
It doesn't
It doesn't add anything, but it doesn't hurt anything. So if you want to leave it, leave it.
The only thing that might do is, in terms of considering an application, I mean, it doesn't say that, but
Yeah.
the commission, if they knew that it was non-contributory or
Yeah.
non-contributing property, their decision might be something other than if
It's a
they
good
knew it was
point.
contributing.
Yeah,
I think
it
that
may
makes
influence them.
sense.
Yeah.
All right, so let's leave it.
Okay.
All right.
I have a question on D2 or C2 or whatever the hell it is, but the two. Mark, Travis, Gordon, Bob, question on 2. I want to make sure I understand the intent. This is saying that a property cannot be eligible for designation as an historic property unless it existed on the same property since the incorporation of Milton.
Does it have to do with the fact that we moved some?
It's on page 8.
Page 8.
Sorry, Mark.
There was one we actually wrote in because we didn't want a scenario, thinking out loud in our group, where someone moved in a house that was a 50-year-old home, put it on a piece of property, and they could say it was historic. There was some concern about that. I don't know what paragraph you're on.
I think it also links to what we're
T2.
tiptoeing around, which is prior use clause. I think it also links to that at some point, that part of the prior use, when you get to it, it might be a little bit better understood that any structure considered for prior use can't be something that was moved in. It has to have been there. And I think it's
Well-
lawyer's point.
You couldn't move in a house and automatically say it was historic. And regarding that prior use thing as well, you couldn't move in a country store from Sandy Springs, put it into Milton, and then be able to use the prior use. You have to be here since incorporation.
Yeah, but this doesn't deal with prior use now. This deals with designation as historic.
But he's saying he thinks
Right.
that's where it was a springboard from.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, then maybe we should move it, though, then to prior use designation, right? Because
Well-
my concern, let me give you an example. There are 2 houses on the southeast corner of Birmingham that, technically, I guess, under some of these things might be considered for historic properties, right?
Southeast corner of Birmingham.
Yeah, Birmingham Crossroads. There are
Oh, yeah.
two houses in the southeast corner that They are in fact on the same property since the incorporation of Milton, right? But both of them have been moved from the property where they were built.
That's southwest.
Southwest, sorry. Thanks, Gordon, sorry. I'm directionally challenged.
That's a
lot more coming out of
Curtis is vertically challenged.
So I'm struggling with how you intended by this language for those to be treated. They're not on the property where they were built. They've been picked up and they've been moved.
Well, neither was moved very far.
I understand that, but they, but they have been
They're within a
moved.
stone's throw.
But they are on the same property they were on when Milton was incorporated.
Yeah.
Okay, so
That's actually why I like, there's some value to this. Because it does say that those two could be considered.
Yeah, but what you're saying, on the other side of that, is if that same movement took place after Milton was incorporated, they wouldn't be considered.
Right.
I don't understand what that has to do with whether they're historic or not. If they're historic in one case, how can they not be historic in the other case?
You might be able to save something, just like in this case. We might be able to save something important by moving it. It shouldn't dilute its historic value necessarily.
Right.
Well,
Different than prior use.
But state and national standards probably would preclude it.
But then it ought to be excluded always. It shouldn't have anything to do with the incorporation of Milton. That's what I'm saying.
Was it trying to prevent people from like creating a village around one person's prior use?
Yeah, but keep prior use off of it. If we're going to move this to prior use, let's talk about it that way. Right now, it's a designation of historic or not.
Yeah.
George, this doesn't make any sense. That's the best I can tell you.
Okay.
You're right.
It makes sense with respect to prior use. I agree.
It wasn't in the state language, Bob told me, and somewhere in our conversations, in our mini drafts, it has been cut and pasted, and it makes no sense.
Okay.
But before we finish this conversation, let's go back and address the buildings at Birmingham Crossroads.
Okay.
Assuming that that movement that took place doesn't negate their historical value to the state and national level, does it preclude them from consideration in Milton?
No, but assuming that the movement doesn't preclude them, then the incorporation date should have nothing to do with it, is all I'm saying.
Right. Okay, that's what I'm going to get to as well.
Okay.
I'm just
I
not
mean,
quite there
I
yet.
don't know whether the movement should or shouldn't exclude them,
Right.
because I agree with Curtis. I think if the house or the building it has historic significance, that there may be a reason you'd want to build it because it could be better preserved somewhere else, right? The fact that it's not sitting on the same plot of ground doesn't reduce the
Yeah,
historic
and those buildings
significance
would
of
have
the
been gone
structure.
if we had not agreed to
Right.
let them be moved.
Right.
And, well,
Well, we can argue about whether they were historic or not. That's a different argument.
well, again, it's about preserving a time.
Right.
Not necessarily about,
Right.
well, we know what they were before, and Curtis
But
seems
I-
to be collecting them, but,
But it
Only
hasn't,
houses built review.
but it hasn't,
sometimes they're historic.
Well, I'm
But it
behind
doesn't-
this prior
George,
use
this-
thing.
this though, again, doesn't have
You already
anything
have
to do
your
with what they're
zonings.
trying to keep from somebody moving
Right.
a historical building into Milton and then calling it historic. This doesn't.
Sorry, Fred, say that again.
I said it doesn't preclude. What they want to make sure is that someone doesn't have an old building in Roswell, moves it up to Milton, and then says,
It's historic.
now it's historic.
I mean, this would be okay with me if it said that no building shall be, unless it is on the same property on which it was originally constructed.
But that would preclude moving it across the street.
Correct. I mean, I'm not saying that's right. I'm saying then at least it makes some sense if that's the criteria.
I don't see how that makes a difference, George.
I'm sorry?
And adding that, it has to be on, I'm sorry, say it again.
I'm saying
getting tired.
it would, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it would make more sense if it said that unless it is on the same property on which it was originally constructed.
Well, isn't that what it's implying here in the first place?
No, because it's got the incorporation date,
Oh,
in there,
yeah.
which really is not relevant.
So you're just saying to remove the incorporation?
Well,
puts a
what
line
it
in
does
What I'm
do-
saying is take out the incorporation and say exists on the same property since it was constructed instead of since the
But then,
incorporation. of the
by
city of
doing
Milton.
that, we would preclude
Yeah,
the buildings of Birmingham
Yeah.
from ever being considered historic.
right.
And I-
Again, I'm not saying that's right or wrong
Right.
from a criteria standpoint.
Well,
but
I
at
would
least
offer
it
that I think that would be a mistake.
Okay.
Not necessarily wrong,
Then,
but
then
a
I think that
mistake.
then I think two ought to just come out altogether.
Because I think that what we would like to preserve as a city versus what may be acceptable to the national
Right,
or
two different
state
things.
record are two very different things.
Sure.
So by precluding those two buildings as the example here, I think would be a mistake. I think that there is a value of that benchmark in time. We don't. I'm not aware of any changes since then, other than those buildings. I don't see any coming that had to be addressed. And doesn't this then solve that issue
By taking it
for
out?
the city of?
I'd rather
Leaving it in.
give the commission the latitude to make a judgment call on whether something's
Right,
appropriate or not.
right, which means take it out altogether.
All right. And you guys don't recall anything?
I think we're okay with
There
taking
was-
it out, but I think as the prior use clause is written now, that it needs to be part of that
Different
if it's
deal.
taken out
That's
the way
right.
it is now.
That's right.
Because
For
one of the
purposes
questions-
of,
I'm sorry.
just for purposes of determining whether it's a historic structure, whether it can be declared a historic structure or not, seems like y'all or whoever is on the commission or committee ought to make that call. Sometimes it might be appropriate, sometimes not.
Well, I think what we were trying to cover with that was, when you get to the prior use clause, we didn't want somebody just moving a historic store from some other location outside the city limits, or even in a currently zoned commercial district, and just putting on a piece of residential or
Understood.
AG land, and then trying to say, well, it's
Understood.
historic, now I can use it for that clause.
Yeah.
I think that's what this was trying to cover. So to me, it's a valid clause, it's just in the wrong place.
Right.
Can we just put it as a placeholder in
Yeah.
prior use until we figure out what to do with that?
Well, I would suggest we leave it where it is until we resolve the prior use issue.
Okay.
Doesn't that make sense?
Well,
No,
I mean,
I
the
think
thing
it makes
is,
sense to take it out. I
the
mean,
thing
we
is,
can-
using
we
those
can-
two buildings at the
we can
Birmingham
hold that
Crossroads, it
paragraph
doesn't
to
preclude
be
those.
I'm sorry.
That's where they were, following the incorporation.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, but.
Yeah, but
Go ahead,
I think George was after dropping the incorporation, and then that would have, to Paul's example, would have
I think
removed them from
If
possibility.
you drop the word incorporation, then those two buildings that we're speaking of lose any potential to be declared historic.
Right.
If you leave it in there, they do. Say, since incorporation, they haven't been moved since
Right,
incorporation.
understood.
But they were moved prior.
Take the clause out, and you don't have any issues.
Agreed.
Take the clause out, we don't have any issues with regard to those two buildings.
Or any
Or
other.
any other building.
But does it preclude what Travis cited as an example a minute ago of moving another structure from outside?
It doesn't preclude it from being considered. It still is up to the commission to decide.
Well, if you look at the Mansell House in Alpharetta, I was on Mansell Road, right? It's not anymore. It's on Old Milton, and Alpharetta considers it historic. So it was moved. It wasn't declared historic until after it was moved.
But taking this out doesn't preclude that from
No.
being considered or not. It allows the commission to decide.
Right.
I think you want to knock it off.
Out.
You want to lock it out.
All right, if you guys are comfortable with that, and there's not any compelling example to force us otherwise, and we've all, I think, vetted this, maybe we strike it.
I'm uncomfortable making that decision so quickly. Can we talk about it?
Well, can you just talk about it slower next time, so we can spend more time?
Let's move on.
Next. All right, so we're striking it.
Yes.
Everybody's in agreement? Okay. All right, we're gonna leave the new D alone for now.
And F.
We'll come back
And
to
F.
that.
And
Yep, and the new E. Okay. Okay, I have something on page 10.
If it's above,
Oh, it's
if
above
the
G.
old G,
It's above G, so, all right, never mind. So it's, G is now the new E anyway, right? Oh, sorry, new F.
Oh, was one under approval criteria on page 10 at the top, is that part of? That's part of it. We're still on
Prior
hold.
use,
Okay,
yeah.
that's on a hold, okay. I'm
Yeah, you gotta
sorry.
be on the south side of the new F on 10 to
Gotcha.
be back in.
Okay.
Without getting into specifics, I have one comment on page 11. It's all part of that new F.
Okay.
I would like to see the language of this conforming to the state statute. This is what I was talking about before. It makes reference to the commission having to submit a report to the Historic Preservation of the Department of Natural Resources, but it isn't as specific as the statute is in terms of requiring that to be done in a timely way so that they get comments back from that body before they make a recommendation.
Okay.
So all I would like to see is that this conform to the statute, that's all.
Which number specifically are you talking about?
It's specifically, what section? It's section F.
It's the new section
Right.
F.
New section F, and it's specifically section 4 under section F.
Right, notification, okay.
Right.
So you want that to reflect the,
I just wanted to conform to the statute, yeah.
Okay. Anything else on page 11? Anything on page 12?
We're done, we're stopping on page 12, right?
right,
Yes, we
section
are.
5, yeah.
All right.
Paul, before we go to the prior use thing, I just want to raise one other point. I apologize for going backwards here, but when we looked at 4C and D, which were the designation, the ones that Joe suggested the modifications to.
Yeah.
Hands and worse.
Wait,
Where-
which
what
page?
Page 7 and
Sorry,
8.
I'm on page 7 and 8. I'm
Wait,
on Roman numeral 4, the old C and D.
Wait,
new
can I
B
just,
and C.
before we go to that, just one thing I noticed on that page we just left on 4, it refers to that one,
What page are you on?
page 11, that page we just left. It refers to section 4B3.
Yeah, the reference needs to change.
It needs to be the new section 4A3, yeah. Sorry, I just
Good catch.
forget that.
What-
I'm sorry, go ahead, George.
What I wanted to just call to everybody's attention is I'm going to use the old designations just for clarity, in old C and DA, right, where it says it is an outstanding example of structures representative of its era. Two things, Robin. One thing we've got to do is for all these defined terms, they got to be capitalized throughout the document. So structures as an example should be capitalized here.
Okay.
But I want to make sure before we agree that that's what we want, that we go back and look at what the definition of structure is versus the definition of building. Structure is defined as a work made up of interdependent and interrelated parts in a definite pattern of organization. Whatever that means. Whereas building is any structure with a roof designed or built to support, closure, shelter, protection of persons, animals, chattels, or property of any kind.
I think when I saw structures, I was thinking like maybe well houses or
Could be
just,
artwork.
Well, should we just insert the word example of buildings
Well,
or structures?
I'm okay with structures the way I think about structures. I have trouble when I read the definition of structure.
Right, I agree.
What in the world that means.
That's a
what
good,
I'm
that's a
saying.
good catch.
I mean, when I read structures in C and D, I was okay with that, but when I looked back and looked at the definition of structure, I don't understand.
yeah, I had a question mark next to structure earlier, but I didn't want to drag us down with it. But no.
At the time, I was thinking structure was more inclusive without. thinking to go
Sure.
back.
That was when I was.
Sure.
No, look, it's in
Go back.
pencil. I don't have a
Right,
pencil in my
right.
hand.
So we would.
Does it accomplish it by adding the word building?
Well,
or
I think
structure?
let's just, I'll try and come up with a better definition of structure, if you want, just to not.
Well, structure is, I like the fact that it's pretty wide
I agree.
reaching.
I'm not trying to limit it. I'm just saying
Maybe you
the
can
word
say-
interdependent, interrelated parts and definite pattern of organization. That's a jigsaw puzzle to me.
Okay, well, it might be a historic jigsaw puzzle.
He wants something more pertinent.
Yeah. Much more pertinent.
That too.
I see what you're saying. I mean,
Actually, I want it to be pertinent, not
I can
unpertinent.
give you an example of a structure versus, like a bridge would be a structure, not a building, but
It's
I see
appurtenant.
what you're saying. Read it, you're like, what is that?
Yeah.
And the committee had nothing to do with this. This is right out of the state ordinance.
All right, well, should we just leave the,
Leave structure,
I'll
he's
volunteer
gonna-
to propose a definition for structure.
I would also ask that you consider maybe just adding building.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was gonna
Then it gets
suggest
to
that
building.
too, but.
Well, but to Travis's point, if we had building, how does that help bring bridge within that definition so everybody
Well, it just
understands that?
includes, so it encompasses the building as well as structures.
Yeah, but it's, you're using structures as part of the
What
definition
if
of
we-
structures.
Right.
Wait.
Structure could be a rock wall, it could be a Civil War battle.
Right,
Right,
embattlement.
right.
Right.
That
All
would-
of the
it would
above.
fit structure, so
So we
I'm
can
not
switch-
suggesting it be limited. I just think we want to put some words there that somehow make sense.
Why don't we just strike
Why
that
don't you-
first sentence and just write,
Something made
constructed
by
by
man.
man, it may be large or small in scale.
Or you could do it by adding,
bad.
going back to B, designation, back to that A. It is an outstanding example of structures or buildings.
It doesn't help. You still
Well, I
got
know,
structure.
I'm
Yeah,
just
but
saying,
George's
I was trying to help you not
George's
have to come up
struggling
with a new
with structure.
definition of structure,
Just-
since
just-
we all think we know what it means, but whatever.
No, I think, I'm almost, I think Carrie's got a good idea. Just say something constructed by man. It may be large or small in scale.
What if it's, what if it's a rock wall?
It's constructed by
Rock
man.
walls.
Not necessarily. What if it's the quarry at
At Providence.
Park?
That's either an object or a,
That wasn't always there. That was a whole created by man.
Yeah, that was
But it was more
constructed
than
by
50
man
years
when it
ago.
was dug out.
Yeah, I mean, I struggle with created by man because I look at different places around the nation and I think, well, of course, they're in national parks. You look at, I can't remember what state it was in, Old Rock Face. It wasn't constructed by man. They consider it historic, but it was also part of the national park. Same thing with the bridges.
But that would be a place, not a structure.
Right.
All right, let's leave it where George is going to try to do a better definition of structure, and then we'll.
And I gave you something to work with.
yeah.
In your spare time,
All right, well,
on the train.
on to you.
Hang on to,
Prior use recognition.
I'll get there. And then I gotta say structure here. And here. Okay. Now to our fun part.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Can we make this next part of our special meeting? I mean,
I agree.
going
I'd-
on 10:30
I'd be
now.
over there. I'd be very
The
much in
most
favor of that.
important part of conversation. I thought it was going to be the primary discussion item tonight.
Well, we could make it really crisp and just choose to strike it.
Well, I was going to suggest, it seems like, I'm not sure if there needs to be a huge discussion, because it appears that the majority, everyone,
Some,
there was
according to the minutes.
some that were here, 5 out of 7, their expression was against
Not
it.
all that were here.
Some of the planning commission, all that were here that night, agreed, I think.
Was in disagreement with it, as well as the DRB, as well as, and I think that what Travis has said before, it's maybe make sure it's still true that, I don't think that they want to hold us back or delay it because of this prior use thing. They just, so.
What was the intent, though? I mean, maybe you guys talked
Well,
about that last time. What was the intent of having that in here? As I read it,
Basically,
it was
it's
the
to allow to basically be able to preserve a building, let's say, the general store.
Hypothetically, the general store.
Yeah, they had two
But
sites,
it's
the
not-
general store and,
The general store.
no,
Chatham.
it's at Chatham.
That's it.
I'm sorry?
They were both general stores originally.
Chadwick's on Arnold Hill.
So, well, let's use the Thompson Road one. 'Cause I'm
Okay,
more
the Thompson,
familiar with
yeah.
that. So the intent is to allow that to be used for retail or
For,
something.
right, but they would have to prove that that's what it was used for. The owners of the property would have to prove that that was a general store. And basically, it would have to, you couldn't move the building, it would have to stay in that place, even though it's a weird place as
Right.
far as traffic control. And then, but it would still have to go before the council for approval to say that that could be used as a prior use, in that another commercial use could be used there that would be appropriate from that time, correct?
Assuming that the building has been declared historic.
Right.
Right, it's got to be done that first.
That has to be done first.
Okay. But doesn't this circumvent the zoning process because it's
Well, that's
It's-
where I was gonna go
One
next.
could
If you
say
think
that.
about the history of that, let's talk about that one in particular. It came before us as a zoning modification, and it was variance, I'm sorry, and it was denied by the, recommendation was denied by the planning commission staff and subsequently supported by the mayor and council. There was significant community opposition to it, and it was, you think at that point it's drawn to closure. And now we're suggesting that it can be reopened by a loophole in the historic prior use recognition, I think is a huge mistake. Period. Now, I can't tell you I've given that same consideration to the other site. I don't remember any discussion on that one. Last time we only used this one as the example.
Yeah, I'd have
But
to
I think that,
work on that.
I think that,
But it's establishing a parallel process that would say that the Historic Preservation Commission would be recommending approval or not of a non-conforming use to the city council.
yeah, that's a mistake.
Right.
Yeah.
Basically, the intent is to be able to preserve that building, so there would be a
But
reason to
It's already been
preserve it.
preserved, right? Because the entree criteria is it's
Well,
got
it
to be
would encourage
designated as historic.
preservation versus somebody just
We're gonna
going
have
and
to
wanting.
anyway to
It
let
hasn't
people
been
as is.
determined yet whether it's historic.
And
I guess you're
actually-
assuming if it
No,
was.
but that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the way this is written, this whole thing only applies if it's been designated as
Correct,
historic to start.
correct.
So unless you get Thompson's store designated as an historic building, this doesn't apply to it.
Right. I understand that, but I also think that this particular component was written specifically to create that opportunity.
I respectfully disagree, not disrespectfully. I think that we're
We'll
using
determine-
that as
we'll
an
determine that.
example. I think that's used as example, and in a way, it's kind of bad because there was a zoning case on it, but I think the intent of this prior use is to help save buildings no matter where they are. It just happened to be those are one of the two buildings that the committee had pinpointed that would be eligible for it.
But isn't the fact that it's designated as historic going to save it anyway, regardless
Not
of?
necessarily, because
Why?
what if they never do anything, and eventually it just goes in disrepair to the point that it can't come back to return? It basically becomes a moot point, and then it's
No,
It's-
I want to address some of those things later in the ordinance, where there are, there's punitive action if somebody does, who's been designated, allows something to
Neglect,
fall
abandonment.
into disrepair by neglect or
Abandonment.
abandonment or by conscious act.
I have that in mind.
well, what if that owner doesn't want to be designated as historic?
Well,
Structure.
that's one of the things about this ordinance. That's why the state law is what it is. It's, the property owner doesn't have the option of deciding whether he wants it to be historic or not. The commission does.
I think if you read through there somewhere, it says the property owner has to agree.
Mhm.
That's the way I understood it.
If that's your intent, that's not the way this ordinance talking about for prior use now, or are you talking about for historic designation?
Historic declaration period.
The property owner has to agree. If the neighbors decide to petition to have it designated as historic, you can't do it under that circumstance without the property owner's consent.
Okay, well, even without that part of the discussion,
Right.
do you understand why we were taking issue
Oh,
before?
yeah, no, I do.
So are you in a different place than all of the people who were present as some of the commission
No,
that night?
I think it makes much more sense to take it out altogether.
Okay.
And that's fine. I mean, if,
How about the other non-attendee that night who was part of some of the all?
that was Fred.
There.
oh, you were here. I'm
Sure,
sorry.
thanks.
It was you, right?
It was,
I mean, you know,
It was Carrie.
Carrie.
Well, we were saying we could clip it and be done with it.
Yeah.
If we're all in agreement that it needs to come out.
We're still not done with it, and, I mean, we're still only on page, what?
No, but I mean, I think that's a big portion of it.
Travis, where-
If everybody's in agreement that they don't want it, why is there a reason?
This is where I.
We still have to get back together to talk about the other stuff.
Right.
I just think if we can nip this and be done with it as a significant
Barney,
accomplishment this
Barney
evening,
fight.
why carry it over to next time?
Nip it in the bud.
Nip it in the bud. Nip it.
Travis.
I'm sorry.
Um,
I was going back to page 10. The old G, the new F. Requirement for adopting an ordinance for the designation of historic districts and historic properties.
Right.
One is application for designation of historic districts and properties. Designations may be proposed by the Milton City Council, Commission, or, and you go down to C, any group seeking designation for a property that does not include the property owner must include a sworn affidavit that the property owner consents to the application for designation.
Right. But read the or, right?
It's
That's
or.
a third
Right,
option,
I think
right?
you need, yeah, I see where, that's the, I had never seen the order before, so I understand where you're coming from now. I was just always under the
This
impression
says
that
the city
the owner has to
council and
consent.
commission can designate a property as historic without the property owner's approval.
Yeah, and I have a problem with that.
That gets back to Curtis's point about, Georgia property rights, right? That's what the Supreme Court cases are about, that define that not to be a taking when it's got historic significance.
It's also why a fair number of
It's
these
allowed.
things
Yeah.
burn at
Yeah.
night.
Okay, so let's hold that discussion because that we can address on our next
Yeah,
meeting.
let me just plant this seed. My only obstacle on to just simply saying, yeah, it ought to be removed is I like the notion of that little general store at Thompson.
I knew
just
there was a
thought
reason
that-
why I
This
didn't
doesn't
say
strike me, this
everyone.
doesn't preclude it
No,
from being
let me finish. But we had to say no because of the spot zoning. It just clinically didn't make any sense. I'd like to understand if there was another clean way to maybe accomplish that without precedent-setting spot zoning. And even if there is or isn't, it may not change anything, but that's the only issue in my mind.
Let me offer this for consideration then, Curtis, with that question that you've posed, is there's nothing that precludes that store from coming forward again after the appropriate time to be reconsidered for zoning appropriate to recreate as a general
Oh.
store. We've said no, and now time has to pass, or now mayor and city
But
council said
I
no.
think we made the right decision
I do too.
relative to precedent setting and grandfathering and all that.
Actually, he withdrew it
Well-
technically.
Yeah.
Okay, don't kill me with the facts, Rob, okay?
But if you think about, the public response.
But you know what I mean. Maybe
absolutely.
I had just gotten there in my mind. I thought we had.
Remember,
I mean, you guys had
traffic
recommended
issues
denial,
there
but once
were-
it got to the council, he had decided to
Okay,
withdraw
well, who
it.
cares what they did? I mean, it's the planning commission.
I know the planning commission made a decision.
It's all about us. Anyway,
The,
that's my only.
there was-
That was my only dilemma with it.
I think I
Well,
remember
without
that.
without the historical preservation, I presume this particular property, that property owner had no other choice, right? He was
Right, I mean, he
either-
tried to
either
do
he
it
made
by,
commercial, he could use the building for his prior use, or he couldn't. Now with the historical preservation ordinance, he could use that property for prior use.
Well,
So he had no choice then, and then what do you do if what choice does that property owner have of using that building for anything? It's not a residential property.
Does it just sit there? Does he destroy it? Does he demolish it?
I guess
Does he-
that was my point, was what
You know, if you're trying to
happens to
preserve
it?
a building,
There are, but I think, Gordon, there are other ways to incentivize a landowner or property owner or a structure owner to preserve it other than a business use. There are, it doesn't have to be necessarily income producing as a business application would have. I mean, what's wrong with considering tax implications, where you create a tax incentive that is equally rewarding, not in income, but in money that's not having to be spent for the. There are other ways to.
What's the use and worth of the building?
I'm concerned that we're talking about two different
Yeah,
things. I mean, I don't remember the decision we made on that being based on a spot zoning.
No, there are more considerations.
Well, no, but what my point was going to be, if in fact that would have been deemed a spot zoning, and therefore it was not something we would do, forgetting about historic preservation, deeming that historic doesn't change that. It's still going to be deemed spot zoning.
And there were traffic and safety issues, there were line of sight issues, there were speed issues, and there were a lot of things.
I understand.
Spot zoning was a larger part of the discussion.
But what I'm trying to say in response to Gordon's point is if you take spot zoning off the table and assume it's not a spot zoning issue, then
Right.
whether that thing should be zoned or used as a commercial property
Still separate.
is something that can be done through normal channels through the Planning Commission and doesn't need to have the Historic Preservation Commission getting involved in that approval process, right? From a use standpoint. The converse is if the reason that can't be approved through the Planning Commission is because it's spot zoning, deeming it historic is not going to alleviate the spot zoning issue.
Right.
You're still going to have the spot zoning issue. So
Spot zoning issue and.
I'm not sure if I agree with
my
that
reason
logic,
for wanting
but
to
I
take
think
it
we're
out is
on
I think it creates a separate parallel process that isn't necessary, that's all.
The goal of going back to historical preservation, like I said when we first started, the goal was to try to save some of these commercial buildings, not specifically that one building, which seems to become the entire argument.
Sure.
It's about all commercial buildings that now don't have a residential use and they have AG1
Right.
zoning.
Right.
I mean, it was, maybe George, listen to your point, I think it's very well said. Historical preservation is not trying to take away from the zoning or whatever those whatever the proper authority is. You could use, I'm thinking out loud, you could use the historical preservation of prior use, and then you have to go get proper zoning thereafter before the council would recommend. That's my 5 cents for it. The whole idea was to incentivize property owners to preserve those buildings.
Or to give them an option.
And I don't know what's going to happen in that building, nor do I really care. I'm actually kind of tired of prior use. 99% of our ordinance has nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
But that was our thinking. So maybe there's a way that they could combine.
Well, I think the way is with the operative or the council declares them to be historic structures and they can't do anything with them.
I think
Period.
they need to move that building over by Curtis's building at Birmingham.
The Thompson Road one?
Too late, because it's after the incorporation of the city of Milton. Can't be declared.
And then you won't have any parking left.
Or if they do it quick before the ordinance is adopted, then you.
I'm
They got a lot of fast moving.
For the sake of you guys in the audience, I mean, I think we understand the intent, and we'll try and figure out how to accommodate that.
Okay, so,
I make a motion, we move,
well,
adjourn.
don't make that motion yet.
Not yet. We got
Second.
I think we're to the point of, the chair hasn't asked.
discussion.
I think we're at a point where we can bring closure to the discussion of the prior use, aren't we?
We just take a hand vote, removal,
I think that's fine with me.
comfortable?
Anybody take opposition to a hand vote of showing whether it's in or out?
Nope.
Okay. All those in favor of removing the prior use recognition from this ordinance, please do so. Please show your favor by show of hands. Okay, we are 7-0. It's out.
Was that your hand up, George?
Yes.
Okay.
It was kind of a Curtis hand.
Curtis hand wave.
Okay, so it's out. Thank
Can
you.
I make one more comment, please? If the changes that were made, the nomenclature, all those changes, if we could have those emailed to us as well.
And gentlemen, we have benefited immensely from you guys being here tonight.
Absolutely.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
I would ask that you maybe just stay one more minute until we establish what our next work session is going to be on this, and hopefully get the benefit of some or all of you, the larger all or some that we seem to debate as to who we are. Hopefully get some or all of you at our next work session as well. Okay, so that being said, let's look at calendars. We're talking about next week as the next shot at it. We have a CPAC meeting on Monday night.
That's all we have scheduled.
So yeah, 29th, Tuesday, 30th, Wednesday, I have a conflict that could be changed. Thursday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, same. I prefer not Wednesday, so Tuesday or Thursday, unless anybody.
Tuesday.
I'm not good Thursday.
Tuesday
You're
would
not
be
good
my
Thursday,
preference.
Joe?
Yeah, it sounds like Tuesday sounds good.
Tuesday you can do, Curtis?
Tuesday would be my number one vote for next week.
Gary?
Yeah, I can do either day.
Tuesday works for you? Okay, I'm good for Tuesday. Jennifer, you're good for Tuesday. George, you're good for Tuesday? Fred, you're gone, right?
Yes, sir.
Fishing?
No.
Fred, don't leave me.
Fred, you're okay with us moving ahead on Tuesday?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so Tuesday it is. Oh, however, are we able to properly advertise?
It's already been what has to be advertised is for the public hearing for the city council. I mean,
Okay.
I'll advertise it, I'll put it on the web.
Today's
I'll put it
Tuesday,
out.
right? You could put it on tomorrow, and it's 7 days.
Well, that doesn't have anything to do. What I'm saying is for an ordinance, it says 15 to 45 days notification of the public hearing.
Okay.
And it's
Commission meeting is not the public hearing.
correct. So what I'm saying is,
You gotta
you guys
get-
are okay. I'll
you gotta
definitely
get
put
the
it on the
12
web. We'll post it, but there's no legal, so, does that make sense?
When did the city council defer their,
They deferred it last night, well, originally
what
they
date?
deferred it.
To us.
no, but they put a date on it.
Yeah,
When
it's
they
for,
were going to hear it again.
It's for work
Work
session
session
of the
October.
12th and for the actual council meeting the 19th, so I have to re-advertise it for the 19th. So I'm gonna have to do that this week in the paper, so. What time? And I'll put, I mean, it won't have the work session,
7.
I won't have your work session in it. Does that make sense? Because the way
Yes.
the ordinance is, it doesn't really
Yeah, it doesn't.
deal with the planning commission legal advertising. It deals with the public hearing, which is the council, which makes it kind of nice because, I mean, I always advertise that the planning commission is gonna happen. It's just, the key is the council meeting legally.
Okay, so
You want,
we're okay with a 7 o'clock
Yep.
on the 29th?
Make it earlier.
Actually, 7 o'clock really works with my work schedule, if that's okay with everybody else. Okay. May I have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Is there a
Paul, you want to make sure they know.
7 o'clock next Tuesday night, the 29th, is what we just agreed to. Is that generally available? Anybody? Okay, great.
Who seconded that?
I second.
Fred,
I
any
tried to beat
discussion?
him.
All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you, everybody.